Chapter 1373. There are about 300 of them. Everyone is riding a horse and carrying a sword. They are like the Khan soldiers. No, they are not as strong as the Khan soldiers. Many of them look like they are emaciated and their clothes are old. As a poor man, Nikolaev was very attentive to details. After his description and Jurovsky's judgment, he finally determined that these people should be the Mongolian cavalry. Looking at their flags, they should belong to the Khan of Siberia's soldiers and should be in the reconnaissance category. This should be a group of Mongolian cavalry. Their mission was to be in charge of guarding the perimeter while keeping an eye on any suspicious targets. Once confirmed, they would call their friends and surround them. Phew! Yang Shindong let out a sigh of relief. With just this group of Mongolian cavalry, Yang Shindong could at least conclude that Shun Bo and the others were fine. Otherwise, these cavalrymen under the Siberian Khan wouldn't be so careful and set the perimeter so far away. Are you willing to take us to find these Mongolian cavalry? Since he knew the whereabouts of the enemy, Yang Shindong naturally would not let it go so easily. His gaze fell on the young man Nikolaev and asked. Nikolaev's face was a little nervous, but his answer was still straightforward. Yes, I'm willing to serve the Khan. He did not understand the five-star army, nor did he understand Yang Shindong. Nikolaev did not know what the consequences would be if he refused. If he angered the Khan, he was afraid that a simple order would be enough to kill all of his people. Good. Come, take out some refined salt and sword for our friends. After Yang Shindong received a satisfactory answer, he laughed and waved his hand. Beta Persei turned around and left. Not long after, he brought the black cavalry to Chief Jurovsky with a few bags of well-packed refined salt and weapons. Refined salt, high-quality refined salt. Jurovsky unceremoniously opened the bag with the dagger in his hand. When he put his finger back into his mouth, he couldn't help but shout excitedly. In ancient times, salt and iron had always been the exclusive property of those in power. It was also one of the items that would not be exported or traded. And in remote places like the Far East, it was impossible to see them. Occasionally, some table salt would appear, but it was also coarse salt. Not only was its quality extremely poor, there were also many impurities in it. Good quality ones could be exchanged for several horses and sheep in one bag. Even so, it was not easy to get some. They were treated as treasures by the tribes. Yang Shindong had given him 4 bags, and each bag weighed at least 50 pounds. That was more than 200 pounds, and Jurovsky couldn't help but be excited. Jurovsky wasn't the only one who was excited. Nicholas and the others were also very excited. At this time, when they looked at Yang Shindong, there was a hint of trust in their eyes. With just this salt and iron, what was the point of selling their lives to the other party? It had to be said that in such a remote and bitter place, a human's life was the most worthless existence. Sometimes, for a mouthful of food, there would be people who would sell their dignity, strength, and life. Yang Shindong was willing to give out these things. In a sense, Nicholas' life already belonged to him. Without disturbing the celebration of this small tribe, Yang Shindong left the place. While ordering the army to rest, he also called Commander Tian Hu over and told him to prepare to send out a group of cavalry to follow Nicholas to the Immerse River and take down the hundreds of Mongol cavalry. Just treat it as interest. Thinking about how the Far East province had suffered heavy losses from the surprise attack, a murderous intent flashed across Yang Shindong's eyes. It had always been him finding trouble with others. Since someone dared to provoke him, he definitely couldn't let them go. That night, this small Russian tribe didn't sleep at all. They surrounded the salt and iron just like that. Some of the young men also changed their rusty iron weapons under Jurovsky's orders and took out sharp cavalry swords. At this time, the things that Yang Shindong gave them were the hope of their tribe. They definitely couldn't lose them. Nicholas wasn't part of the people protecting the salt and iron. Not only him, but there were also 4 other people who didn't participate in the guard duty last night. Under Jurovsky's orders, they had a good night's rest. Today, they would follow the Heavenly Khan to deal with the Mongol cavalry. When Yang Shindong walked out of the tent in the morning, he was also full of energy. After reaching the Grandmaster realm, Yang Chendong could sleep peacefully in any environment as long as he wanted to. This was one of the main reasons why he was full of energy. Tian, who had already brought 1,000 cavalry and was ready to set off at any time. This time, he was going to personally lead the army to kill the enemy, leaving behind Division Commander Tame Mu, with a sad expression. Nicholas had breakfast with the soldiers of the 5-star army, and he saw a satisfied look on the faces of the 5 soldiers. To them, they had never eaten such a delicious breakfast in their lives, let alone enough to fill their stomachs. When Nicholas and the others looked at the 5-star army soldiers after breakfast, their eyes were filled with envy. Beside the Amu Jia River, there were many military tents here, and from time to time, one could see men in Mongol clothing walking back and forth. Sometimes, they would even patrol around the river. Just as Yang Chendong expected, this was the Siberian Khan's cavalry unit. Their mission was to be in charge of the safety of this area, and, at the same time, to see if there were any enemies from the far east who escaped from here. However, their gazes were mostly on the inner side, and they did not pay much attention to the south of the Amu Jia River. In their eyes, the enemy was in the north, not the south. As for whether or not someone would attack them from the south, it was not a problem for them to consider. There were 300 Mongol cavalry here. Although they were not elites, they were not something that anyone could target. For example, if Chieftain Jurovsky's 100-man tribe encountered them, they would probably run as far away as possible. If they wanted to face 300 Mongol cavalry who lived on horses all year round, they would need at least 1,000 cavalry to dare to take the risk. This was where Ahuchi's confidence came from. As the general of the 300 cavalrymen, he had never thought that anyone would harm him. All he thought about was how to find the Far East army that had escaped and then strike at them to gain merit. As such, when Yang Chendong brought 500 black cavalry units to the south of the Amu Jia River, Ahiki, who received the news, did not panic. Instead, he calmly walked out of the tent. When his subordinates reported that there was a cavalry unit in black armor outside the tent, Ahiki did not believe it and thought that it was an exaggeration. No matter if it was in Siberia or the Far East, iron was hard to find. If a normal person could get a good weapon, they would be proud of it for a long time. Who would be able to make armor out of iron? That was not a waste, but a luxury. Even the personal guards of Khan Hulahan only had leather armor on their upper bodies, which was already very enviable. With disbelief, Ahiki walked out of the tent. As expected, he saw a sea of black armor, and his eyes were filled with greed. Even though there were 500 cavalry, far more than the 300 he brought with him, there was no fear in his eyes. However, there was no trace of fear in Ahuchi's eyes. Perhaps it was because he had not had an opponent for many years, but he was used to treating everyone as prey. Even if there were 500 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he still thought the same. He was already used to treating this area as his own backyard. Ahiki did not think that there was anyone he could not defeat. Even if there were more enemies than him, and their equipment was better than his, it was still the same. War is not about who has better equipment. Ahiki muttered to himself. He then raised his right hand above his head and shouted, "All troops, gather!" The 300 Mongolian cavalry had already gotten on their horses. When they heard the general's order, they quickly gathered around Ahiki in groups of 10. It was said that small details revealed true ability. Just based on how quickly the Mongolian cavaliers gathered together, this was a group of well-trained cavaliers. This was especially so when there was a rare look of fearlessness in their eyes, and this was something that was rarely seen among the 5-star armies. Haha, Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon, also laughed. He did not think that there was anything special about this Mongolian cavalry. He had seen many such opponents, and the strongest was the Walla cavalry led by Yeshen. But what was the result? Didn't they still lose at his hands? They had once looked down on the 5-star army, but reality would give them a slap in the face. He also did not think that this Mongolian cavalry was that strong. Young Master, Yang Heir, who had been following Wang Chong from the side, had an excited expression on his face. It was rare for him to encounter an opponent who did not run away. Although there were only 300 of them, They had successfully aroused Yang Er's fighting spirit. I'll give you 100 long way. Go. Yang Qindong said casually, as if he was talking about something very normal. The black cavalry moved out. Under Beta Persei's lead and Ba Daozhang's support, a group of 102 cavalry jumped over the Immerse River and headed straight for their target. Nicholas and the other 4 also wanted to urge their horses forward, but they were stopped by Cho Wu, who was standing at the side. This made the 5 of them puzzled. Did they not need to fight? After Yang Qindong took out a large amount of salt and iron to give to his tribe, Nicholas and the other 4 had already sold their lives to the 5-star army. They were even prepared to be members of the 5-star army. This was the rule. After receiving benefits from others, they naturally had to work for them. Chapter 1374. The 5 of them were even prepared to die in battle. However, when Xiuvi stopped them, the 5 of them realized that the 5-star army was different from other armies. They did not need them to risk their lives. Could it be that they were really helping their tribe for free? The other 4 people were led by Nikolaev. After being stopped, their gazes naturally fell on him. Let's wait and see. Nikolaev, who was also a loss, could only say this. At the same time, he looked at the battlefield. He could not understand why the 5-star army only sent out 100 cavalry even though they had more people. What was the reason for this? Very quickly, Nikolaev had an answer. Everything that happened on the battlefield told him that there was only one reason why the 5-star army only sent out 100 cavalry. These Mongol cavalry were not worth sending out more cavalry. The black cavalry leaped over the river, and the distance between the 2 sides was getting closer and closer. When they were less than 4 li away, Ahuchi shouted, 100 cavalry on each side, charge. Ahuchi thought that he had seen through the situation and that the enemy had sent out 100 cavalry to test the waters. This was his chance. He only needed to kill these 100 cavalry as quickly as possible and take advantage of the fact that the enemy had not reacted to the situation to kill them. Then, the situation would be settled. When he thought about how the enemy's black armor would increase his army's combat strength by at least 50%, he began to laugh maniacally. It was truly a blessing from the gods that such a good preparation was placed in front of him. There was no reason for him not to accept it. On the battlefield, the 200 Mongol cavalry shouted and made all sorts of noises. They spread out and surrounded the 100 black cavalry. Although there were only 200 of them, because their formation was too spread out, it actually gave off a strong momentum. They either went towards the left wing or the right wing. Some even went towards the middle. The sabers in their hands continuously spun as they prepared to strike. On the other hand, the 100 black cavalry soldiers also spread out. With Beta Persei, Ba Daozhang, Peng Yu, and the others at the tip of the arrows, they formed groups of around a dozen people, and they tore through the air like arrows that left their bows. They headed straight for Ahuchi, who was protected by 100 Mongolian cavaliers. It was as if no matter where the wind blew, he would just go all the way. Fire! Fire! Ahuchi's face revealed a trace of panic when he saw that the incoming enemy did not care about being surrounded and instead went straight for the root of the problem. Although there were only 100 of them, for some reason, they gave him a great sense of pressure. It was like being stared at by a wild beast on a grassland. With a command, the 100 cavalrymen beside him quickly took out their strong bows, knocked their arrows, and began to shoot. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Arrows pierced through the air unceasingly, their target being the 100 black cavalry soldiers who were charging straight at them. At the same time, a large number of Mongolian cavaliers also surged in from the left and right of the black cavalry. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was an ambush from all sides. At that moment, the black cavalry had already met with dozens of Mongolian cavaliers in front of them. Their black clothes and black armor allowed them to ignore normal arrows. At that moment, they only needed to swing their swords and kill the enemies who were charging at them. Clang, clang, clang. The Black Knight Dragon Guards did not show any signs of slowing down, nor did they make any movements to dodge. They allowed the arrows to hit their bodies, and the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Then, The sabers in their hands clashed with the sabers of the Mongolian cavalry in front of them. Then, an unbelievable scene appeared. The Mongolian cavaliers who were riding on their horses with ferocious expressions were stunned on the spot. It was as if their acupoints had been sealed. They did not move at all and allowed the black cavalry soldiers beside them to jump past them, as if they did not know what was going on. This scene shocked Nikolaev, who was watching the battle. This scene shocked Ahuchi, who was commanding the battle. This scene shocked the Mongolian cavaliers who were flanking them from the left and right. A scene that should not have happened on the battlefield happened just like that. But everyone knew that swords and sabers had no eyes on the battlefield. Often, the outcome of a battle could be decided in an instant. There is absolutely no room for the slightest bit of absent-mindedness or carelessness because it often meant that one was already walking together with the god of death. But now it was not just one Mongolian cavalier, but dozens of Mongolian cavaliers who were standing there. It was as if a spell had been cast on them, and they did not move at all. This scene was so real that it caused everyone who saw it to have a big question in their hearts. They could not help but ask in their hearts, "What is going on? What is going on now?" While most people were still confused, Beta Persei led the black cavalry and did not stop charging forward. They continued to charge forward bravely, and soon they reached Ahuchi's camp and stood in front of the Mongolian general. Kill! Ahuchi was also puzzled as to why his cavaliers did not move. However, with the enemy before them, he could not care so much. He clamped his legs on his horse and rode forward with his saber raised. Dang, dang, dang. When the two sides came into contact, they exchanged 3 saber blows in an extremely short period of time. Only the most elite cavaliers could achieve such a speed. Only the veterans who were one with their horses could do it so skillfully. The black cavalry slashed 3 times in a short period of time. Ahuchi and the others who were passively defending also blocked 3 saber blows. A huge force traveled down the saber to their arms, causing the arms of the 100 Mongolian cavaliers to tremble uncontrollably. Shock rose in their hearts. Not only was the speed of their opponent's saber extremely fast, the strength was also extraordinary. He was definitely a tough opponent. Before the shock in their hearts could completely disappear, an even more shocking scene appeared. After blocking the 3 slashes, they were shocked to find that the sabers in their hands had actually broken into 2. This sudden scene shocked everyone, causing them to be at a loss for what to do. They were completely shocked, just like the dozens of Mongolian riders earlier. Their minds were blank as they sat on their horses, forgetting everything. How could they have known that the black cavalry dragon guards had already changed their weapons to divine sabers? This was something that Yang Qindong had specially brought out from the military factory in Crimson City. As Yang Xie gained more and more iron ore, his forging skills continued to improve. The quality of the sabers also increased greatly. Every new divine saber lived up to its name. Not only were the sabers thinner and lighter than normal sabers, they were also sharper and had reached a state where they could cut through iron like mud. In just 3 saber blows, they were able to cut the enemy's saber in half. This showed how powerful and tough the saber was. Get down from your horses. Beta Persei and the others, who had succeeded in one strike, reined in their horses. Then, they swung their arms and used the backs of their sabers to smack down on the backs of the Mongolian cavaliers who were still standing on their horses with shocked expressions. Under the powerful force, the Mongolian cavaliers who were unable to defend themselves in time fell down from their horses like dumplings. 100 Mongolian cavaliers, including Ahuchi, were all captured at the start of the fight. This sudden scene also shocked the Mongolian cavaliers who were charging over for both sides. In their eyes, Ahuchi and the others were captured the moment they came into contact with the black cavalry. How did this trick work? They really could not understand it. It was only when the dozens of Mongolian cavaliers who were fighting against the Black Knights and Dragon Guards on the battlefield suddenly shouted and ran in all directions with their broken sabers in hand that the other Mongolian cavaliers noticed that the weapons in their comrades' hands had been broken into 2 at some point in time. They finally figured out what had happened and why their general had been taken captive in a single encounter. The remaining 100 or so Mongolian cavaliers suddenly changed their direction of charge. They no longer fought against the black cavalry. Instead, they ran in all directions. A group of cavaliers dressed in black armor and equipped with spirit. They could ignore the arrows fired from afar, and also had sabers that could cut through iron like mud. This kind of opponent was not someone they could fight against. Since they could not win, they could only run. They had to report this news to the Khan. Not good, they want to run. Nikolaev instinctively shouted and immediately rode out. The scene that had just happened in front of him had stimulated him greatly. In their eyes, they were invincible, and there was nothing they could not win. Wherever they appeared, it was as if a gust of wind had swept through and not a single blade of grass grew. Once any of the Russian tribes met them, they would usually run away before the battle even started. Yet, it was precisely such a powerful existence that was unable to withstand a single blow from the Black Knight Dragon Guards. In just a single exchange, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were defeated. This was simply too unbelievable and unbelievable. After the shock, Nikolaev's eyes were filled with killing intent. The Mongolian cavaliers were defeated. Was this not the time for him to collect the blood debt? He thought about how his tribe originally had more than 1,000 people, but after being attacked by the Mongolian cavaliers time and time again, there were only a few hundred people left. How great was this hatred? Even in his dreams, he wanted to take revenge. He could only hate the fact that his strength was limited. Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, how could he let go of this chance to beat the dog in the water? Nikolaev wanted to chase after the enemy, and the 4 companions beside him did the same. However, before they could truly run out, arrows tore through the air and landed on the Mongolian cavalrymen who were trying to escape one after another or on their war horses. Tian Hu appeared with 1,000 cavaliers. They had been lying in ambush for a long time in order to surround the enemy and not give anyone a chance to escape. Chapter 1375. Tian Hu, who was very confident in the Black Cavalry, had been waiting for the moment when they would be defeated and run away. When the opportunity came, he gave the order, and the 1,000 cavalrymen under him raised their bows and shot. One after another, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell from their horses and fell to the ground. They fell so hard that they saw stars and lost their sense of direction. Rows of cavalry moved out in an orderly formation from all directions, forming a huge circle that surrounded the 300 Mongolian cavalrymen. It also made some of the Mongolian cavalrymen who had just climbed up from the ground and wanted to escape despair. Capture them all. Kill those who resist. After Tian Hu, who was wearing a purple cape, gave the order, the elite cavalrymen under him quickly went forward and restrained the Mongolian cavalrymen who fell to the ground one after another. After 3 Mongolian cavalrymen who wanted to resist with their blades were beheaded and blood splattered 3 feet high, the other Mongolian cavalrymen became obedient. At this moment, all of them had despair in their eyes, and they looked like the commoners who had been surrounded and killed by them. From the beginning to the end of the battle, less than 15 minutes had passed, and Beta Persei had already returned to Yangshandong. Reporting to young master, in this battle, we killed 12 of the enemy and captured 288 of them. There were no casualties on our side. Please give us your orders. Clean up the battlefield and interrogate the prisoners. Yangshandong's magnetic voice rang out. After Beta Persei gave a military salute, he handed everything to Commander Tian Hu to deal with. Tian Hu, who had been through hundreds of battles, was very familiar with these matters. He quickly came to a Heki and asked about whether there were any more Mongolian cavalrymen nearby. A Heki, who had been beaten silly, had 2 of his fingers mercilessly chopped off by Tian Hu. He screamed and said loudly, I'll talk. In less than 10 minutes, a Hachi told him that there was another group of Mongol cavalry 100 miles away beside the Lena River. The 6th young master, he told me that there is a group of 2,000 Mongolian cavalry near the Lena River in the northeast. Their mission is to monitor this area and prevent the Far Eastern Army from breaking out, Tian Hu reported as he walked in front of Yangshandong. 2,000 cavalrymen. Yangshandong sneered. Let's go and devour them. Anyone who dared to challenge the five-star army was an enemy. Yang Qindong would never show mercy to his enemies, not to mention an army of foreign races. Although there were only 1,500 of them, none of them showed fear when Yang Qindong gave the order. From their point of view, it was as if their 1,500 men encircling and eating the 2,000 Mongol cavalry was a matter of course. It was so normal and normal. He left behind a small group of 50 men to watch over a Huchi and the other two captives. In the blink of an eye, Yang Qindong brought the main force and disappeared from the Amuga River. Lena River. The river was flowing from a high point to a low point. Beside this 30 feet wide river, a number of tents had been set up. Many Mongolian soldiers patrolled with their sabers in hand. Piles of firewood were piled up here, and many fully dressed sheep were placed on the piles of firewood. What a lively scene. The sky was about to turn dark, and bonfires were lit. From the tents at the side, many white-skinned women in tattered clothes walked out. Under the illumination of the fire, everyone's face revealed a terrified expression. These women were all captives of the Mongolian cavalrymen, and they were all women from the nearby Russian tribes. Over the past few days, the Mongol cavalry had appeared like locusts and invaded their homes. They killed all the men in their tribe and captured them. Some of them had lost their fathers, some had lost their husbands, and some had lost their children. Their experiences had caused some of them to feel numb. If not for the fact that they did not have the courage to die, they would have followed in the footsteps of their families. However, although they did not die, they only had a body. Without a soul, without hope, they were just walking corpses. Bring them out and let them dance. If they dance well, they will have food to eat, ha. A middle-aged man dressed in Mongolian armor laughed out loud. He was the general of the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, Nanlidi. Ever since he had followed Hulahan from Siberia to the Far East region, he had been living a blissful life every day. In the day, he would lead the cavalrymen to sweep and kill, and at night, he would enjoy the fruits of his labor. Under his small eyes, his gaze carefully swept across the white women. He had already chosen 2 targets who would serve him to sleep tonight. Compared to the life in the Far East region, it was much better than the barren Siberia. There was good wine, beauties, and a Han Chinese army that could be taken as prey at any time. Compared to the Siberia region that they had swept through countless times, this place was simply too rich. Of course, what Nanlidi enjoyed was still a far cry from what Khan Hurahan and General Akmu enjoyed. The other party had taken over the Far Eastern region's capital, Al City. There were hundreds of thousands of people from various races there, and the wealth and beauties were uncountable. Although he was envious in his heart, Nanlidi could only sigh. He knew that his experience was still shallow, and some good things would not be his turn. However, it was not that he did not have any hope. For example, if he could find the hiding place of the Far Eastern Army, it would be a great achievement. It was said that the Far East Army's provisions were hidden in a very secretive place, and only the governor knew where it was. Once he found this person, the merit he would receive would be enough to qualify him to go to All City. At that time, his treatment would undergo an earth-shattering change. Tomorrow we will send people to search nearby and expand the search area. However, for now, of course we have to enjoy it. Come on, let them dance. Nanlidi, who was full of expectations for tomorrow, seemed to be filled with yearning and hope. His entire mood seemed to have become even more excited at this moment. The general gave the order, and the women who were chased out of the house were thrown into the inner circle, and under the light of the bonfire, they started to dance the Russian folk dance. Outside, countless Mongolian cavalrymen drank the horse milk wine, ate the whole roasted lamb, and laughed with saliva dripping from their mouths. Some of their gazes were filled with lust when they looked at the scene, as if they were evil children on the grasslands staring at white lambs. The women felt their hearts palpitating, and some of the more timid ones started to cry. They could already imagine what kind of fate would befall them when night fell. Thinking about how they would soon become the bedding of these evil wolf-like people, some of them could not help but start to sob. Everyone would be afraid, and now, the Russian women were not only afraid, they had already started to feel fear. This caused their dance to become messy, and it immediately attracted the scolding of some of the Mongolian soldiers. The more nervous one was, the easier it was for them to make mistakes. Finally, one of the girls lost her composure. Especially when she was too direct with the gaze of a Mongolian soldier, she accidentally sprained her ankle and fell to the ground. "Bastard, you can't even dance properly. What's the use of having you?" One of the closest Mongolian soldiers pulled out the scimitar at his waist and walked towards the woman with a ferocious gaze. His body was filled with killing intent, and his gaze was filled with rage. He wanted to kill one as an example, and let all the Russian women know that in front of the brave Mongolian soldiers, they could only listen obediently. Otherwise, only death would await them. The Mongolian soldier stood up, and the Russian women cried out in shock. They hugged each other, but they threw the woman on the ground to the side. In times of danger, the selfish side of humans was fully displayed. Although they were all prey, no one had any intention of standing up for the woman. It was better to live than to die, and this was a truth that could be easily displayed in many ways. All of the girls were trembling in fear, causing the other Mongol soldiers to laugh out loud. They loved to see their prey in fear, and it was as if that was the only way to show off their strength. The Mongolian soldier who stood up had already pulled out the scimitar on his body, and in a few steps, he arrived in front of the Russian woman on the ground. What he saw was a pleading, pitiful, and helpless gaze. However, at this moment, it was as if he did not see it. In these few days, he had already killed 2 Russians, and he was no longer afraid of killing. On the contrary, he could even feel a trace of pleasure from it. Sometimes, killing could be addictive, especially when the prey did not dare to resist and was at his mercy. That kind of feeling was indescribably wonderful. The Mongolian soldier raised the scimitar in his hand, and his face was filled with smiles. Then he swung the scimitar down, and he could not wait to see the woman covered in blood and struggling on the ground. The other Mongolian soldiers did not move, and it was as if they were already used to this scene. They were still waiting for the scimitar to fall, and as long as this woman died, the other Russian women would definitely be more obedient. Later on, wouldn't they be able to do whatever they wanted, and they would be at their mercy? Unknowingly, everyone's gaze landed on the Mongolian soldier, and they were waiting for what was about to happen. However, 1 breath passed, 2 breaths passed, and that scimitar did not fall. It wasn't until 3 breaths later that someone suddenly shouted, "Where did the bow and arrow come from?" "Not good, enemy attack." Under the illumination of the bonfire, an arrow with a trembling tail appeared on the back of the Mongolian soldier. At this moment, a quarter of the arrow had already entered. Previously, because of the angle, no one noticed it, but now that they saw it clearly, some of the experienced soldiers began to shout. Chapter 1376. It was also with this shout that the ground rumbled. It was as if 1,000,000 drums were beating in the hearts of those who heard it, causing many people to be surprised at the first moment. Any veteran who had been on the battlefield could tell that this was the sound of horses galloping on the ground. From the sound of it, there should be a large number of cavalrymen. Get on your horses, pick up your weapons, and follow this general to kill. Nanlidi also threw the wineskin in his hand to the ground at the first moment, and then he started to make a fuss. He had not heard that the Khan was going to send troops to help him. Furthermore, one of his brothers had already been shot by an arrow. Even if he used his toes to think, he should know that the enemy was not a friend. However, he did not panic. The only enemies in the vicinity were a few scattered Russian tribes. They were few in number and did not have enough horses and weapons. They were not a threat to them. As long as they could withstand the initial attack, it would be time for them to counterattack. As expected of well-trained elite soldiers, under the command of their general, the drunken Mongolian soldiers seemed to have changed. They were all in high spirits as they found their horses and pulled out their scimitars. They looked as if they were ready to enter the battlefield at any time. Rumble, rumble, the sound got closer and closer. Following that, a group of cavalrymen in black clothes and black armor charged towards the Mongolian camp under the protection of another group of cavalrymen in green military uniforms. While they were still far away, The arrows in their hands were fired from afar. When the arrows landed on the tents, they caused a raging fire. The newcomers were the 200 Black Cavalry led by Ba Daojiang, the vice captain of the 1st Battalion of Black Cavalry Dragon Guards, as well as the 600 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Army led by Tian Hu. During the day, the Black Cavalry had been in the limelight by the Immerse River. At night, Tian Hu did not want to be a spectator. He took the initiative to ask for battle, and Yang Qindong allowed him to bring 600 soldiers. As for the other Black Cavalry and the 1st Cavalry Army, they surrounded the perimeter to prevent the enemy from escaping. Before Yang Qindong found the enemy's main force, he did not want his whereabouts to be known by others. When Tian Hu and Ba Daojiang appeared, it was as if a dark cloud had gathered. With the best weapons, the strongest horses, and the strongest physique, the 5-star army charged into the Mongolian camp as soon as they appeared, showing their tyrannical and domineering side. Without any time to prepare, there was no way to counterattack. The 5-star army arrived in front of them. The lit tents and the bonfires on the ground became the guiding lights, illuminating the surroundings and giving the 5-star army directions, allowing them to kill in all directions. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers who had yet to find their horses were hacked to the ground. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to counterattack realized that the scimitars in their hands were quickly broken into two, becoming useless objects. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers fell to the ground covered in blood, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers watched as the enemy's scimitars slit their necks. They were powerless and helpless. It was as if they had been surrounded by the small Russian tribe. Now, they had become the prey, the meat on the fish. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. Those who surrender, throw down your weapons and kneel on the ground, and you will live. Tian Hu held his scimitars, and in a short period of time, he had already cut down 3 Mongolian soldiers. He was filled with killing intent as he watched the Mongolian soldiers in front of him dwindle. Those who surrender will live. Those who resist will die. More and more 5-star army soldiers began to roar. Their voices were transmitted into the ears of the Mongolian soldiers. Some of the Mongolian soldiers who had been frightened pale by the scene in front of them finally put down their weapons. This was simply an unequal battle. One side came prepared, while the other side came unprepared. One side was preparing their troops, while the other side was immersed in wine and women. One side was filled with killing intent, while the other side was filled with fear. One side was like a hot knife through butter, while the other side was defeated like a mountain. Under such a situation, if they continued to resist, they would only die. Just like those Russian girls who knew that it was hard to live, but did not want to die, these Mongolian soldiers were the same. After knowing that they could live if they surrendered, they did not hesitate to choose the latter. With a large number of Mongolian soldiers kneeling and surrendering, the situation on the battlefield became clearer. In less than an hour, the entire battle had ended. Ba Daojiang and Tian Hu began to clean up the battlefield. The Russian girls who had been captured stood together, the Mongolian soldiers who had surrendered squatted together, and the corpses of the Mongolian soldiers who had been killed were carried together. Under the illumination of the flames, the Russian girls looked at their surroundings in panic. To them, the Mongolian soldiers had been defeated, but it did not mean that they were free. No one knew who these Mongolian soldiers were, and whether they had any other intentions. If one were to use a phrase to describe their mentality, it would be that they had just escaped from the wolf's den and entered the tiger's den. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The earth trembled once again, causing the Russian girls, who were already worried about their future, to have a drastic change in expression. Could it be that another cavalry was coming? If that was the case, would they be able to survive the battle? On the other hand, the Mongolian soldiers who had dropped their weapons on the ground were pleasantly surprised. More Mongolian soldiers? Could it be their own people? If that was the case, wouldn't they have a chance to retaliate? Some of the smarter ones could not help but raise their heads and look around. Pucci, with a slash of the saber, a head that was still moving around quickly flew into the air. When the head was separated from the body, blood spurted out and sprayed on the bodies of the surrendered Mongolian soldiers, causing them to tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, they finally realized how ruthless their opponents were. They were even more ruthless than they were. Compared to them who killed without batting an eyelid, these Mongolian soldiers were the demon kings. Don't have any dirty thoughts. Act like you are surrendering. When Ba Daojiang's loud voice rang out, he was wiping the saber in his hand. With such an example, the rest of the Mongol soldiers quickly became obedient. Now, even if the battle cries outside shook the heavens, they did not have the courage to raise their heads. After a series of rumbling sounds, another group of Mongolian soldiers entered the battlefield. Yang Chendong, who was dressed in a golden battle robe, entered the battlefield under the protection of the Black Cavalry and the soldiers of the First Army. Behind them, hundreds of men dressed as Mongolian soldiers were hugging their heads as they walked. Among them was the general of this group of Mongolian soldiers, Nanlidi. When the battle started, the situation was one-sided. When Nanlidi saw that the enemy was not friendly and that they were strong, the first thing he did was not to lead his soldiers to retaliate. Instead, he led the hundreds of elites to escape. At any time, survival was always the most important thing. Nanlidi was thinking that as long as he could escape, he would go to All City to seek an audience with the Great Khan and ask for more reinforcements to completely eliminate this unknown enemy. With the thought of revenge in mind, Nanlidi decided to endure for now. However, not long after he left the tent, he met Yang Chendong, who had been waiting for him. With an order, the arrows shot out, causing him to feel dizzy. After another wave of cavalry charge, the Mongol soldiers who were already scared out of their wits all laid down their weapons and surrendered. Nanlidi was forced to join them as well. However, even at this time, Nanlidi still had a sliver of hope in his heart. He thought that this unknown enemy should not recognize him. As long as he did not make a sound and did not reveal his identity, there was a chance that the other soldiers would mix together and find an opportunity to retaliate. Nanlidi, who always had his own thoughts, quickly found that his hopes were dashed once again. This was all because he saw someone. A centurion under his command, a Heki, was holding a torch and identifying the captives. In a short period of time, a number of centurions had been identified. This scene caused Nanlidi to lower his head involuntarily. Unfortunately, a Heki quickly appeared in front of him and ordered him to raise his head. Nanlidi had no choice but to raise his head with a ferocious gaze. He wanted to warn a Heki not to spout nonsense, but just as he raised his head, a palm landed on his face. At this time, General Nantai still wants to threaten me? Needless to say, this slap was from a Heki. He was using the power of the 5-star army to vent his anger. If it was not for this person pushing him aside, he would not have led his troops to guard the perimeter and would not have been captured by the 5-star army so quickly. Of course, he was also using this opportunity to express his loyalty to the 5-star army. After witnessing the strength of the 5-star army, he had already given up on resisting. In his eyes, the most important thing was to survive. Nanlidi, who was slapped, was furious. As a Mongolian warrior, he cared a lot about his face. As the saying goes, when you hit someone, don't hit their face. Now that his face had been slapped, he only wanted to fight to the death with a Heki. However, he had only taken a step forward when he was met with a flurry of punches and kicks from the 2 5-star army soldiers standing beside a Heki. After who knew how many kicks, Nanlidi finally became obedient. Lying on the ground, he felt that lying on the ground was a very comfortable thing. He is the commander of the troops, General Nanlidi. I will have to trouble the two of you to bring him over. Unlike facing Nanlidi, a Heki had a flattering expression. Under the drag of the 2 5-star army soldiers, Nanlidi was thrown in front of Yang Chendong, who was already sitting under the golden blade. Just as he was about to lie on the ground and play dead, a clear voice entered his ears. If you don't want to die, kneel properly. Chapter 1377. With the scene of him killing the surrendered Mongol soldiers, Nanlidi immediately knelt down and did not even waste a breath of time. The soft feared the hard feared the rash, and the rash feared those who did not care about their lives. The facts proved that the ancients did not lie. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry were either killed or surrendered. After the matter was tallied, not a single one of them managed to escape. This was because Nanlidi was too careless and did not even send out a single scout. Maybe he thought that he was the king in this world, and no one dared to offend him. None of the 2,000 Mongol cavalry managed to escape, and none of the Russian girls managed to escape. The tallied result was that there were close to 400 of them. Among them, there were many women who were close to 50 years old. From this, one could see that the Mongol cavalry were a bunch of country bumpkins who wanted anyone. Along with Yang Chendong's arrival, these Russian girls were naturally released, and Nikolaev personally talked to them. Based on Yang Chendong's instructions, if they could find their own tribe, they would be given food and allowed to leave. They would also take the chance to spread the news of the five-star army's arrival and some policies that would benefit the people. On the other hand, if they had no home to return to, they could follow the five-star army to All City, which was where the far eastern province was. When they reached there, whether they remarried or started their own tribe, as long as they were willing to work hard for the five-star army, they would not starve to death. On the contrary, those who worked hard would change and live a better life. At this moment, Nikolaev was filled with absolute respect for Yang Chendong. He personally saw 1,500 five-star army soldiers deal with 2,000 Mongol cavalry like they were chopping vegetables. At this moment, he already had the thought of joining the five-star army. He placed a lot of importance on the mission that Yang Chendong gave him and wanted to complete it well. They did not rest for the entire night, and Nikolai brought his 4 brothers to talk to almost all the Russian women. After confirming that more than 30 of them could find their own tribe, they gave them food and allowed them to leave. There were still around 350 Russian women left in the camp, and they would be sent along with the 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen who were captured and sent to the city of Arr. The only difference was that these women were considered good citizens while these Mongol captives had to do manual labor. In the future, they would have to repair the city walls and roads. The next morning, Yang Chendong first listened to Nicholas' report. After knowing that Nicholas had completed the task well, he gave him some encouragement. Then he saw Nanlidi, who had become very obedient after being tortured for a night. Bugnam of Gojozian, this sinner is willing to take my place. Please don't kill me, don't kill me. A night of torture made Nanlidi understand what was worse than death. At this moment, he did not dare to think about what happened last night. He only wanted to live, even if he had to sacrifice his dignity. Very good. Then immediately follow your agreement and report the appearance of the five-star army's reinforcements at the Immerse River. Remember, no matter what method you use, as long as you can lure the main force of your cavalry over, it will be a great achievement. Otherwise, if you can't complete this task, you can prepare to die. No, it will be worse than death. Yang Chendong didn't look at Nanlidi. He didn't have a good impression of such a spineless general. If it wasn't for the fact that he still needed this person, he would have already ordered people to drag him out and behead him. Yang Chendong gave him a chance, and Nanlidi readily agreed. He knew that whether he lived or died, or live a life worse than death, would depend on the completion of this task. How could he dare to be careless? After he left the tent, he took the initiative to look for a Heki. The five-star army would not allow him to leave. Some things could only be done by someone trusted by the Khan. Yang Chendong did not care about what Nanlidi was going to do. He brought the army and retreated towards the Immerse River. When he came, he had already observed that the terrain was very suitable for a large army to fight. He had to set up a trap in advance and wait for the enemy to take the bait. Arching, the place where the capital of the eastern state was located. At this moment, the largest mansion had already become the residence of Abelia, Khan Hurahan. It had been more than 3 months since they occupied Arching. This was also the most comfortable winter that Hurahan had ever experienced. In the past, when he was in the Abelia region, when winter came, it would feel like a year. Everywhere was white snow. In some places where there was no wind, the snow was almost 10 feet deep. Even if the cavalry fell into the snow, they would quickly disappear without a trace. In such an environment, no work could be done. Everyone could only stay in their yurts to hide. This was also known as the winter cat. Even if Hurahan was the Khan, it was the same. The only difference was that the yurt he stayed in was bigger. However, this year's winter was completely different. In the far eastern state, although the snow was still falling and the weather was still cold, there were wide streets and hundreds of thousands of people of various races. There were also many goods and food that could not be found in the Abradia region. This place was like a big treasure trove. Hurahan and his soldiers were dazzled. Then came a round of looting. Whether it was food, goods, houses, money, or women, they all became the targets of their looting. In order to prevent the people in the city from escaping, Hurahan had also ordered the 4 cities to be sealed off. Without his permission, no one was allowed to leave this place. This made Dal City seem like a large sheep pen, where hundreds of thousands of people were kept as their prey. Hurahan, who had never been so rich, could finally eat his fill. He could wear clean and warm cotton-padded clothes. Every night, when he slept, a different woman would warm his bed. Those days were so beautiful that he would not want to change them even if he was given a fairy's body. After 3 months of such drunken stupor, Hurahan had put on a lot of weight. Not only him, but the cavalry under his command had also become much stronger. After getting used to living a good life, he was afraid that he would go back and live a poor life. So he was troubled. Where was the food in the eastern state? This became a sore point for Hurahan. According to Tang Sheng, who had surrendered, there was a batch of relief food in the far eastern region. It was to prevent natural disasters from happening. There were about 1 million dawn of food. If it was only for the 30,000 cavalrymen, it could last them for 10 to 20 years. If they could find this food, wouldn't it mean that they would not have to worry about food for the next 20 years? When he heard this news, one could imagine how excited Hurahan was. But the only fly in the ointment was that other than Governor Chun Bo, no one knew where the food was hidden. Hurahan did not believe it and ordered his general, Akmu, to lead his men to search all over the city. Some places were even dug up, but they did not find anything. Seeing that the food in the city was getting lesser and lesser, and if this went on, they would have to rob the people of their food. Hurahan began to panic and had no choice but to increase the search for Chun Bo. But Chun Bo seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Not only that, but the other 3 division commanders of the Far Eastern Army had also disappeared. Hurahan did not believe that Chun Bo would leave just like that. According to Tang Sheng, he had injured the governor back then, so he would not be able to escape far with his injuries. Moreover, the eastern state was the result of years of hard work by the governor. He would not give up so easily. Find him. If he is alive, I want to see his corpse. Hurahan called General Akmu, the surrendered general, Tang Sheng, and the Russian merchant, Belinsky, who had provided him with important information. In front of them, he slammed his fist on the table and said sternly, "General Tang, has there been any news from the other spies you arranged in the Far Eastern Army?" The furious Hurahan first looked at Tang Sheng and asked, "No." Tang Sheng shook his head. He didn't understand why none of the spies in the army had sent him any news. Could it be that they had been found? That was impossible. How long had it been? Tang Sheng was puzzled, but Supreme General Akmu didn't care that much. Seeing that the Great Khan was angry and that he wanted to see the corpse, he naturally agreed. He also said that he would immediately send out more scouts and expand the search area to find the remnants of the Far Eastern province. As a surrendered general, Tang Sheng, who had nowhere else to go, also said that he would fully cooperate with General Akmu in search for Chun Bo's possible hiding places to prevent any loopholes. Both of the generals had expressed their stance, which made Hurahan reveal a satisfied expression. Then his gaze fell on the merchant, Belinsky, wanting to see what he had to say. The real reason why Hurahan was able to conquer the Far Eastern state was because of this Belinsky. Belinsky grew up in a white family. Because of his parents' low status, he had never eaten a proper meal before he grew up. At that time, he had vowed that he would change everything through his own efforts. In the future, his children would not have to worry about food anymore. It was said that the children of the poor were able to take charge of the family at an early age. After Belinsky had his ambition, he worked hard for it. Coupled with his talent, he slowly became a true merchant. In order to obtain more benefits, he traveled extensively and was not afraid of danger. One time, he accidentally came to the Far Eastern Prefecture and saw a huge city standing there. At that time, regardless of whether it was Siberia or the Far Eastern region, they were all undeveloped and deserted. Other than a few cities where the Khans were located, one could occasionally see a tribe of 1,000 people. Those could be considered prosperous. However, there were hundreds of thousands of people from various races in Dal City. This shocked Belinsky and made him very excited. Merchants knew that as long as there were people, they could do business. These hundreds of thousands of people were equivalent to hundreds of thousands of customers, which meant that they could earn an uncountable amount of money. Chapter 1378. In his excitement, Belinsky used his business methods to understand the situation in the city, as well as the prices of the various items in the city. As his understanding of the city deepened, he was also deeply shocked by the dazzling array of goods in the city. For example, glass products, perfume, silk, tea leaves, and so on were all used here. Once these things were sold elsewhere, the benefits would be unimaginable. In his excitement, Belinsky took out all of his savings to purchase goods in all city. Gradually, he established a relationship with Tang Sheng. Under his intentional roping, the two of them quickly became friends, and he was also able to learn some secrets that no one else knew. For example, if a Han merchant were to purchase goods from Archeng, the cost would be reduced by a lot, and they would receive a lot of preferential treatment. For example, Tang Sheng actually had Mongolian blood in him, and his tribe was in the Abelia region, etc. Belinsky had always been an ambitious businessman. After learning about the situation, he had other ideas. For example, he could drive the Han people out of the Far Eastern region and let him personally control everything. That way, his strength would increase by hundreds or even thousands of times in the shortest amount of time. At that time, he would no longer need to run around doing business. At that time, his descendants would no longer have to worry about not having enough to eat. After the ambitious Belinsky left the Far Eastern region, he came to the Siberia region to look for Khan Hurahin. If he wanted to achieve his goal, he needed a powerful partner, and Hurahin was that person in his heart. Hurahin, who was also ambitious, quickly got together with Belinsky. Then, they took control of Tang Sheng's tribe and used him as a spy to launch a surprise attack. Without any preparation, Chun Bo was injured and fled, and the Far Eastern region changed hands. In fact, Hurahin was able to live a good life now because of the information and help provided by Belinsky. Therefore, in his heart, he still valued this merchant very much. Now, he looked at him and wanted to hear if he had any good opinions. This did not disappoint Hurahin. From the perspective of a merchant, Belinsky made a suggestion: open the city gates and let the commoners out. At the same time, offer a large reward for information on Chunbo's whereabouts. No matter who it was, what tribe they were from, or what status they had in the past, as long as they could provide information on Chunbo's whereabouts, they would be rewarded with 50,000 taels of silver. If you can capture him alive and deliver him to me, you will be rewarded with 100,000 taels of silver. Whether it was 50,000 or 100,000, it was not a small number. If they hadn't conquered Archeng, even if they sold Hurahin, they wouldn't have been able to gather so much money. But now, he had already occupied the Far Eastern state. He had plundered a lot of good things here, but he didn't have time to take away the silver. These mere tens of thousands of silver taels were nothing in his eyes. Great Khan, everyone has a greedy heart. As long as we offer a large enough reward, no one will not be tempted. Once the news spreads, we don't have to worry about Chun Bo not showing up, Belinsky said confidently. This came from his understanding of human nature. In this world, no one didn't like money. All they had to do was provide information, and they could get 50,000 taels of silver. They wouldn't be able to finish eating and drinking for the rest of their lives. Who wouldn't be tempted? The so-called loyalty was only because the bargaining chip for betrayal wasn't enough. Now, that Belinsky had raised this bargaining chip and was satisfied anyone with a weak will would know what decision to make. Good, very good. Hu Lihan was overjoyed when he heard that. He just wanted to find Chun Bo and use him to find the million dan of grain. He didn't care about the process. A huge net was set up to find Chun Bo. At this time, Chun Bo didn't know that someone had put a bounty on his head. He didn't even know that Yang Qindong had led the army into the Far East. At this time, he was suffering from a fever in a forest 50 miles east of Arching, enduring a life-and-death crisis. It's still not working. He's still burning. The captain of the guards, Xia Qian, said worriedly after removing his hand from Chun Bo's forehead. If it doesn't work, then boil some water. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Kong He, clenched and unclenched his right fist. He seemed to have made a decision. Tang Xing's sudden attack had caught Chun Bo off guard. He had been stabbed while running away. Fortunately, the Far Eastern Army had a complete set of traditional Chinese medicine, so a knife wound wasn't fatal. However, Chun Bo hadn't had a good rest. His wound had become infected while he was running, causing him to have a high fever. Although the wound was no longer inflamed, if the fever didn't subside, his life would still be in danger. Scalding one's feet with hot water was a good way to get rid of the fever. Everyone who studied under Yang Shui knew this. However, the problem was that they were in a state of hibernation. They couldn't boil water and smoke to attract attention. If Chun Bo woke up, he would never allow such a thing to happen. However, this was a matter of life and death. When Chun Bo wasn't awake, Commander Kong, he took his position and gave this order. Okay, let's be careful. The captain of the guards, Xia Qian, nodded and ordered someone to make the arrangements. He himself didn't leave Chun Bo's side at all times. He even had a short knife with him. Following Tang Sheng's rebellion, it was hard for Xia Qian to trust anyone. Speaking of which, it was precisely because of Tang Sheng's rebellion that Chun Bo became vigilant. He firmly grasped the military power in his hands and gave the order when he was running away. Without his military order and tiger tally, even the 3 commanders couldn't mobilize the soldiers of the Far Eastern Army. As a result, the counterattack couldn't be carried out and the 3 divisions could only find a place to hide. If he wanted to turn the situation around, the first thing he had to do was to wake Chun Bo up. In order to achieve this goal, Xia Qian didn't care whether he would be discovered or not, since no matter what he did, it would be contradictory. He would just choose the lesser of 2 evils. They naturally didn't lack firewood in the mountains. The only problem was that once they did this, smoke would inevitably be produced. This was a dangerous thing that could easily expose their location. As a result, even though the guards were extremely careful, there was still smoke coming out of the forest. It was spotted by the Mongolian scouts who were searching nearby. However, due to the distance, he couldn't immediately go forward to investigate. After thinking for a moment, he turned his horse around and rushed towards a nearby Mongolian army. Just as this Mongolian scout was about to leave, there was another cavalry scout about 8 li away who also saw this scene and left. The hot water was finally boiled. The unconscious Chun Bo was supported by Xia Qian as he placed his feet into the tub of hot water. With a cry, Chun Bo woke up from the hot water and slowly fainted again. Fortunately, after soaking in the hot water, his body began to sweat. After 2 hours, his body temperature began to drop, and Chun Bo woke up again. With the fever temporarily gone, Chun Bo's spirit seemed to be much better. With Xia Qian's support, he forced himself to sit up. He first looked at the tub that was still warm and frowned. You guys started a fire? Yes, it was my order. The 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Kong He, took a step forward and took responsibility. Beside him, Commander Xia Qian also followed up and said, I also agree. AI. Hearing that they had started a fire, Chun Bo sighed. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. However, since the fire had already started, it was too late to say anything. He could only hope that no one would discover them. All right, let's not talk about this matter. This place could be exposed at any moment. We need to leave this place immediately and look for another safe place. Commander, the 2nd Cavalry Division is nearby. Should we gather with them? Knowing that the commander would make such an arrangement, Division Commander Kong, he volunteered. No, Bo shook his head and said decisively, "We are in danger at any moment. Tang Sheng has rebelled. No one knows if there are any spies in the army. For the safety of the army, we cannot take the initiative to contact anyone." A person couldn't fall in the same place twice. Bo's method was understandable. Although it was a little passive, it was better in terms of safety. After the other three divisions went into martial law, it could indeed ensure their safety to the greatest extent. However, this way, the military would be in danger. It's fine. With our guard division, we will protect the general safety even if we have to risk our lives. As the commander, Xia Qian had a determined expression. Although the guard division had suffered heavy losses on the way out of Alair City, there were less than 200 people left from the original 2,000 people. However, even if there was only one person left, they had to arrange for the general to be sent out. Good. Hearing Xia Qian's attitude, Bo patted the back of his hand in satisfaction. Then, his face was covered by a layer of worry. "Sigh, it's a pity that our radio is broken and we can't contact the outside world. The situation here can't be spread out in time. I think the sixth young master must be worried sick." Bo temporarily regained consciousness. However, it didn't eliminate the possibility of him having a high fever at any moment. After all, the hot water treatment didn't solve the problem. Without a safe environment to rest, the fever could reappear at any moment. Using this time, the guard division made the decision to move. However, just as everyone was packing up and Bo was being carried onto a military stretcher, a soldier hurriedly came to report that there was a large group of Mongolian cavalry outside the mountain. There were at least 1,000 of them. They found us so quickly. Whether it was Kong He or Xia Qian, their faces sank. Chapter 1379. Maybe this is fate. How about this? You guys go first, and I'll cover you. Remember, no one can have the right to mobilize the army without an order. If I die, then wait for the sixth young master to send a new commander to give the order. In comparison, Bo's expression was calmer, as if everything that happened was not out of his expectations. "No, if we're leaving, we'll leave together." Xia Qian and Kong, he said almost at the same time. As the captain of the guards, protecting Bo was his most important task. Once the commander was in trouble, he would naturally not be able to avoid punishment. It was understandable that he would say such words. However, Kong, he was the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, so he did not need to do this. However, Kong, he still made such a decision. When Bo heard it, he could not help but sigh. He could understand Kong He. He was originally the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, but because he was worried about his illness, he took the initiative to leave the division. Now, it was not impossible for him to return to the division, but after he returned, he would probably only be able to hide in the dark and would not be able to mobilize the army. After Tang Sheng's rebellion, without Bo's orders, even the commander could not mobilize the army. He felt that this commander had no authority. Instead of going back to hide, he might as well kill the enemy here and leave his life or death to the heavens. In fact, Bo used to trust Commander Kong He very much. Otherwise, he would not have arranged for him to guard the nest in the far eastern region when he sent troops to rescue Beginning City. However, since there was a problem with Tang Sheng, as the commander, he had given the order that the army should not move without orders, so he had to treat everyone equally. Sighing, Bo knew that it was impossible to chase the two of them away. He could only speak while he was still conscious. Since that's the case, let's move to a safe place now. Let's go. After Xia Qian agreed, he ordered the guards to speed up. At the same time, he sent out scouts to scout the enemy's situation. He wanted to find an opening where the enemy was weak to charge out. There were 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen surrounding this area. They were quite lucky and were patrolling this area. When they heard the report from the scouts, they rushed over with the intention of giving it a try. Unexpectedly, they really bumped into a big fish. Although he wasn't sure if the person who was surrounded was a general from the Far Eastern region, it was already a great achievement that he was able to fight back. The Mongolian general's eyes glowed with excitement as he said, "Don't be in a rush to attack. We need to surround them before we attack." In any case, we cannot let a single person escape. It had to be said that these Mongol cavalry were quite strong. After roaming the Siberian region for many years, they had unique experience in fighting cavalry in mountainous regions. In this aspect, even a five-star army that had been through hundreds of battles would not be their match. This was also the main reason why Yang Qindong did not immediately head for Arching, but instead set up an ambush beside the Amuga River. It was because they were good at fighting in the mountains that the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen did not take the Far Eastern Army seriously. In their eyes, the Far Eastern Army was just a defeated opponent. Therefore, after the order was given, they did not rush to surround the Far Eastern Army. This made Xia Qian and the others, who were in the middle of the encirclement, very anxious. They were already prepared to fight back with all their might when the enemy charged at them. They were also prepared to look for a weak point to break out of the encirclement. However, the enemy did not panic and continued to shrink the encirclement. In this way, it would be hard to say if there was a weak point. They are still not in a rush to charge. We have to make the first move. Xia Qian was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, he would not have become the captain of the guards. After thinking deeply, he made a decision. He wanted to counterattack first and see if he could disrupt the enemy's formation and find a way to break out of the encirclement. Let me go. You have to stay behind and ensure the safety of the general. This is the most important thing. Kong stood up again and made his decision to lead the troops. No, this is my responsibility as the captain of the guards. How can I let Mr. Kong take the risk? Xia Qian shook his head and said, "What do you mean by taking the risk? Do you think we will be safe if we stay here?" Kong did not back down. Obviously, the two of them saw the danger in front of them. Instead of sitting here and waiting for death, they might as well charge out and fight the enemy to their heart's content. At least they could kill a few enemies. The two of them were still arguing. Neither of them had the intention to back down. On the outside, the Mongolian cavalrymen were getting closer and closer to them. The encirclement was also shrinking. It looked like the battle would start at any moment. However, they did not know that behind them, there was a group of cavalrymen quickly gathering and closing in on them. They were the vanguard that Yang Qindong sent out. They were the vanguard led by Dai Qua, the former commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Considering that Dai Qua was familiar with the situation here, Yang Qindong sent him out to see if he could find Chun Bo's position. When the time was right, he would coordinate with him from the inside. Based on his understanding of the military commander, Dai Qua searched a few places but did not find anything. When he once again marked out a region and wanted to continue searching, a scout reported that he saw smoke floating out from the mountains. He immediately brought a group of cavalrymen and rushed over. Considering that the information had not been confirmed and he was not sure if this was the location of the Far Eastern Army, Dai Qua did not increase his speed. He was very careful to avoid being discovered by the Mongolian scouts. It was only when the scout at the front reported that they found many Mongolian cavalrymen outside the mountain and that they were moving forward that Dai Qua disregarded everything and rushed over. Since the Mongolian cavalrymen were moving, there must be a target here. Wouldn't their target be the Far Eastern Army that he was looking for? Thinking that he was finally going to find the missing army, Dai Qua was a little excited. He could not help but increase the speed of his army. One side was moving at full speed, while the other side was slowly encircling. With one increasing and one decreasing, the distance between the two sides was quickly closing. A huge battle was brewing in the forest. Reporting, a large number of unknown cavalrymen have appeared behind us. The Mongolian scouts were not incompetent. Dai Qua's actions behind them finally attracted their attention. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 10 li, 20 li of open land and 10 li of forest. This was the distance that the scouts usually patrolled. When a Mongolian general Ulu heard the news, he was not worried but happy. Didn't this prove that they had caught a big fish? Otherwise, why would so many enemy cavalrymen appear? Can you see how many people there are? Ulu's voice carried a trace of excitement and agitation as he asked. There are too many trees, so I can't be sure. However, there should be no less than 1,000 people. The scout first shook his head and then thought carefully before explaining. Okay. Hearing that there were no less than 1,000 people, Ulu was even more delighted. If there were too many enemies, he might have to consider whether or not he had the strength to fight. However, if they were on the same level as him, he had nothing to worry about. With the same number of soldiers, his cavalrymen were better at fighting in the mountains. He was confident that he could deal a heavy blow to the enemy. Send down the order. Apart from leaving 200 men to keep an eye on the target in the mountains, everyone else get ready to charge. Ulu decided to take down this group of enemy cavalrymen. In order to obtain the merit, he did not have the intention to report it to his superiors. This caused him to lose the last chance to kill Qinbo. After the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen received the order, they continued to advance slowly on the surface, shrinking the encirclement. However, they were secretly prepared to turn around and fight at any moment. Dai Qua, who was quickly approaching from behind, did not notice this. He did not care who was surrounded. Based on the principle that an enemy of an enemy was a friend, he had to save them. As for whether or not he could defeat them, he was still confident. He was once a member of the Far Eastern Army, so Dai Qua naturally knew about the strength of some Mongolian cavalrymen. Because the enemy had lived here since young, they were used to fighting in the mountains. If it was a one-on-one, he did not have much confidence. However, the scouts had reported that the enemy only had 1,000 cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, he had twice the enemy's. Furthermore, he had led the army through the baptism of war. Many of the soldiers were not veterans, but they had been through life and death situations. With double the number advantage, he was confident that he could defeat the enemy. Both sides had their own plans, and the distance between them was getting closer and closer. 10 miles, 8 miles, 6 miles. When they were only 3 miles away, they could hear the sound of horse hooves in the forest. The 800 Mongolian cavalrymen who were already prepared started to counterattack. They suddenly turned their horses around. As they ran back, they took out their bows. Charge, kill them all. Dai Qua took the lead and rushed to the front. When he vaguely saw the shadows of many enemies flashing from behind some trees, he didn't hold back and shouted loudly. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will win. In the dense forest, the speed of the warhorse was not much of an advantage. Whoever was braver and more courageous would naturally have the advantage. There was no need for anyone to give any orders. When the distance between the two sides was less than an arrow's distance, many bows and arrows were shot from all directions towards the approaching 5-star Army's cavalry. Ding, ding, dang, dang, the sound of arrows clashing with cavalry swords could be heard. The 5-star Army soldiers did not show any signs of fear and continued to charge forward. Even though along the way, some of their soldiers were shot off their horses and some even died from the arrows, this did not stop them from advancing. The 5-star Army's rules were very strict. When the general gave the order, even if there was a mountain of blades and a sea of flames in front of them, as long as there was no order to stop, they were not allowed to take a step back. Chapter 1380. Under the strict military rules, the 2,000 cavalry did not retreat at all. They could only continue to advance, closing the distance between the two sides. At the same time, the archers started to reflect the arrows. In terms of archery, the 5-star Army had put in a lot of effort into training. Even though most of the Mongolian cavaliers had used the geographical advantage to hide behind some trees, the retaliation for the 5-star Army's archers still brought quite a lot of pressure to them. Even though their damage was not as great as when they were on the plains, they still managed to suppress the enemy's archers. After the 5-star Army paid the price of 200 cavalry casualties, they managed to close the distance between the two sides, and their advantage in numbers showed. This also forced the Mongol army, which only had 800 cavalry, to retreat. Uru, who was leading 200 cavalry to wait for news of the army's victory, suddenly heard that the battle was not going well and that the army was being forced to retreat. A look of panic flashed across his eyes. It was not as if he had never seen the strength of the Far East Army before. Tang Sheng, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, was not the only one who had surrendered. He had led an entire division of more than 8,000 men. As one of the Mongol generals, Yu had seen the training of the Far Eastern Army. It was really normal, and compared to them, they were more than 10% weaker. Logically speaking, such an army should not be hard to defeat. As long as the arrows successfully suppressed the enemy until they couldn't even raise their heads, then they could find a suitable moment to suddenly attack. With the momentum of a tiger leaping down the mountain, it was possible to destroy the enemy's formation. At the same time, the enemy's fighting spirit and morale would also be destroyed. Once the morale of the army was messed up, no general would be able to turn the tables. As such, before this battle, Yu was really confident. However, who would have thought that the enemy would be so strong? In just a short time, they had actually charged over and forced his army to retreat. Yu's face was filled with confusion, wondering how the strength of the Far Eastern Army had suddenly increased by so much. Suddenly, another wave of battle cries entered his ears. When he looked over in panic, he saw hundreds of Far Eastern Army suddenly attacking. Without enough preparation, his remaining 200 cavalry were actually suppressed. The ones attacking were the 200 guards who stayed by Chunbo's side. They had also heard the battle cries from mountains. Based on their intuition, they knew that the reinforcements had arrived. Logically speaking, without Chunbo's tiger tally, the various divisions could not act rashly. However, since the reinforcements had arrived, they naturally had to do something. After some discussion, Kong He and Xia Qian each led 100 warriors and rushed down the mountain from two different directions. They used practical actions to support the reinforcements to create a center. Facing enemies from two sides, even though Yu was filled with reluctance, he still decisively gave the order to retreat. He had already thought it through. Since he did not have the appetite to swallow up the Far Eastern Army, he would ask for reinforcements. After all, he was the one who discovered these enemies, so he would definitely get the credit. What he needed to do next was to keep an eye on these targets. The Mongolian cavalry suddenly retreated. However, whether it was Dai Qua, Kong He, or Xia Qian, none of them had any intention of chasing. They tried to get closer, wanting to see the other party's identity. Marching. Before Yu's battle report reached here, Aaheki appeared first. With the token from General Nanlidi, Aaheki successfully met General Akmu, following which he followed Yang Qindong's instructions and told him about the 5-star army that had come to help the Far Eastern Army. Hearing that the Far Eastern Army's reinforcements had appeared, Akmu did not dare to delay and quickly brought Aaheki to meet Kagan Hulin. Within the Kagan's tent, Hulin called Belinsky and Tang Sheng over to listen to the report. Along the way, Aaheki had already memorized Yang Qindong's instructions countless times. After seeing Hulin, apart from the initial panic, he was able to think clearly and tell him everything. Based on Aaheki's description, the 5-star army only had 10,000 reinforcements, but the amount of supplies they brought was endless. There was no end to the carriages. While saying this, Aaheki noticed that both Hulin and Akmu's eyes were filled with desire. Obviously, they were stimulated by the spoils of war. On the other hand, Belinsky seemed to be in deep thought, but it was hard to tell what he was thinking about. There really are countless carriages? Hulin did not think too deeply about it. He just wanted to confirm whether Aaheki's words were true or not. Yes, I dare to use my head as a guarantee, Aaheki said confidently. Ah, good, good. Hulin laughed loudly. Then his gaze fell on Tang Sheng and asked, General Tang, you know the most about the 5-star army. Tell me about it. Yes. Tang Sheng cupped his fists and replied, about the 5-star army, this subordinate has come into contact with them once. He had seen them on the grassland when he and Commander Chunbo were rescuing the beginning city. To be honest, they are very powerful and have a lot of troops. If we were to fight them on the grasslands, I'm afraid we wouldn't be their match. Oh, they're that powerful. Hulin felt uncomfortable all over when he heard this. After all, the strength of the enemy always made him feel uneasy. Yes, they're very powerful. When the 5-star army launched their attack, The hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen of the Walu tribe and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty were no match for them. Tang Sheng recalled the scene that had happened in front of him and sighed. He even thought about whether his betrayal of the five-star army was a good thing or a bad thing. However, it was already done, and it was meaningless to dwell on it now. He threw the pressure brought by the five-star army to the back of his mind and continued, "But that's only in an open area like in a mountain forest. I think they can't even use 30% of their usual strength. In addition, the Far East is vast, with many mountains and lakes, and the roads are difficult to travel. It's not convenient for the army to move, and the transportation of food is also extremely difficult. In comparison, there's nothing to be afraid of." Houlihan was initially shocked by the might of the five-star army, but when he heard Tang Sheng's words, he couldn't help but nod his head and say, "That's right, this is the Far East, not the grasslands. No matter how strong the five-star army is, they won't be able to send their army here. Otherwise, just the rations alone will cause them to fall into chaos. In the end, this is our territory. Since they want to extend their tentacles here, we might as well cut them off and let them know who has the final say here." Houlihan, who already had a plan, changed his tone after saying this. He looked at Akmu and said, "Great General, this Khan will give you 10,000 elite troops. Do you have the confidence to defeat the five-star army and bring back all the supplies they brought?" As the great general of the Mongolian army, Akmu was definitely a fierce general. It could be said that he wasn't afraid of anything. When Tang Sheng said that the five-star army was so powerful, he snorted disdainfully. He wanted to prove that he was the strongest when he had the chance. Now that he had been chosen, there was no reason for him to disagree. He immediately said loudly, "Don't worry, Great Khan. 10,000 elite troops will be enough to take care of this five-star army reinforcements." As expected of a great general. "Good. If that's the case, then this Khan will wait to hear your good news." Houlihan laughed loudly. Clearly, he was in a good mood. Yes. A proud expression flashed across Akmu's face as he turned and left. Belinsky and Tang Sheng then left as well. After walking out of Houlihan's residence, Belinsky suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked at Tang Sheng, asking, "General Tang, the five-star army only has about 10,000 cavalrymen. Why do we need to bring so many supplies when we're out?" "Oh," Tang Sheng chuckled and said, "The five-star army doesn't lack money at all. Although they have been fighting in the north and south for the past few years, I have never heard of shortage of resources. Every time they go to war, they will bring enough supplies and supplies. This has already become a habit." "I see." After hearing this, Belinsky couldn't help but reveal a look of shock. Earlier, he was wondering if this was a trap set by the five-star army. Now, it seemed that he was thinking too much. However, when he thought about how rich the five-star army's resources were, he couldn't help but yearn for it. Unfortunately, he had already joined forces with Houlihan and offended the five-star army. It would be difficult for him to cooperate with them in the future. Not long after Belinsky and Tang Sheng left the residence, another scout came to see them. They were sent by General Ulu to ask for reinforcements. When Houlihan heard that he had found traces of the Far Eastern army, he was naturally overjoyed. However, he didn't immediately send troops to eliminate them. In his opinion, the Far Eastern army was already a dish in his bowl that could be picked up at any time. Instead, the five-star army was the target that needed to be dealt with immediately. He was afraid that if he was late, the five-star army would run away. "Go back and tell General Ulu that this Khan will send 1,000 cavalry to help. Have him keep an eye on the Far Eastern army. When General Akmu returns in triumph, it will be time to send troops to deal with the Far Eastern army." Houlihan made the decision to deal with the five-star army first before dealing with the Far Eastern army. What he didn't expect was that this move would give the Far Eastern army, which was already on the verge of death, time to breathe. This would sow the seeds of his defeat. General Dai Qua led the army to meet up with Division Commander Kong, Heian Mountains. Then, he went to see Commander Chun Bo, who had fainted once again. After the temperature dropped again, Commander Chun Bo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes and saw Dai Qua, His originally dispirited aura also became excited. Division Commander Dai, why are you here? Did the reinforcements arrive? Chapter 1381. Yes, General. The sixth young master has arrived personally. He's bringing close to 100,000 soldiers and logistical personnel towards Al City. Dai Qua held Chun Bo's hand tightly as he spoke in an equally excited manner. What? The sixth young master has arrived personally? Ha, that's great. Cough, cough, cough. Chun Bo coughed violently because he was too excited. Sir, please take care of your body, Dai Qua said with concern when he saw Chun Bo's face turning red. It's fine, it's fine. The sixth young master is here. I'll get better soon. Ha ha. Chun Bo laughed again after he panted for a while. Although his fever had not completely subsided, it was obvious that he was in a better mood. Dai Qua was relieved when he saw that Chun Bo seemed to be in good mood. Without this person, he would not be a commander. He was grateful to his savior, so he asked for instructions when he spoke. Sir, I brought a radio this time. Do you have anything to say to the sixth young master? Radio? That's great. Report the Far Eastern Army situation to the sixth young master immediately and ask for further instructions. Chun Bo's expression became more excited. He looked like he wanted to receive Yang Qindong's reply right away. The radio was taken out, and the report was sent out immediately after it was connected. Chun Bo narrated in detail about the fall of Arching and Chun Bo's suspicions about some of the officers in the army. Before his suspicions were resolved, he did not dare to gamble with the army. Therefore, he did not move the army without permission and reported the situation one by one. When a radio was sent out, Yang Qindong, who was far away at the Amuga River, had already dug a pocket. He was just waiting for the Mongolian cavalry to enter. At that moment, Commander Dai Qua's telegram was sent to him. Yang Qindong calmly read the contents of the telegram. He wasn't angry, nor was he angry. As a lone army, the Far Eastern Army had been subjected to all kinds of tests ever since it was established. Due to geographical reasons, they couldn't get the support of the five-star Army headquarters. This caused problems to arise during the construction process. The process of taking a new path had always been tortuous. Yang Qindong had long anticipated that there would be various problems. It was just that he had suffered a huge loss this time. Even the city was lost, which was far beyond his expectations. Fortunately, according to the telegram, the other supplies from the first city and Chichien city were stored in another safe place and were not lost. This could be considered a blessing in disguise. As for what Chun Bo said about the problems in the army, Yang Qindong could understand. After all, other than the initial part of the Far Eastern Army soldiers, the rest were recruited from the local area. Such an army would not have any problems if nothing happened. However, once they encountered adversity, it was hard to say. However, no matter what, Chun Bo's method of dealing with it was still good. He completely hid the army and controlled them. He did not allow any of them to go out. This could ensure that the army would not fall into chaos. Of course, this was not a good plan. At least, it was not a long-term plan. Fortunately, Yang Qindong was here. All of this would not be a problem anymore. Come, send a telegram to Chun Bo. Tell him that he can release the army. Tell him not to worry about the problems in the army. If there are problems, solve them. If the pustules don't show up, there are always hidden dangers. Now it's time to dig out these tumors. With his hands behind his back, Yang Qindong's aura surged, giving people a feeling of omnipotence. This time, since he came to the Far Eastern region, he naturally had to solve the problem. It would be fine if those disloyal people were honest. However, if they dared to do anything extreme, he did not mind using some heads as a sacrifice. Facing the foreign races, Yang Qindong would never be polite when he raised his butcher's knife. The telegram was quickly sent back. Yang Qindong also returned his thoughts to the present. Just now, the scouts had reported that the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry reinforcements had already left Arching and were heading towards the Amuga River. They didn't even bring any rations with them. It was obvious that they were here with the intention of plundering. They would appear in front of him in 3 days. Come, Badai. Yang Qindong walked out of the tent and looked in the direction of Arching. He saw countless five-star army soldiers digging horse traps. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Akmu personally led the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry and rushed day and night. In less than 3 days, they were 30 miles away from the Amuga River. The scouts had already been sent out, and there would be news soon. While arranging for the army to rest, Akmu also waited for the news from the scouts. He had already prayed to Tungri more than once that the 5-star army would not escape. Perhaps the prayers were effective, as the scouts returned and reported that the 5-star army was just 20 miles away from them. That's right. When he heard that the enemy was not 30 miles away, but 20 miles away, Akmu heaved a sigh of relief. This was enough to prove that the 5-star army had been rushing and not waiting at the same spot. If the 5-star army's position did not change a few days ago, he would have thought that the enemy already knew that he was coming and had prepared a trap for him. But now, the enemy had left their original position. This was enough to prove that his suspicions were unnecessary. In the past few days, the 5-star army had only rushed a few dozen miles. Not only did this not make Akmu think too much, it even made him look down on them. Just from the speed of the other party's movement, they were not a strong army at all. Naturally, his confidence in this battle had risen a little. Pass down the order. The army should have a good rest. We will attack the camp tonight. All right, let the people guarding Aheki relax and prepare some good food for him. Akmu said with a relaxed expression. He had some suspicions about Aheki before, so he arranged for people to watch him. Now that he did not have so many suspicions, he did not need to watch him too closely. Who knows, he might be a meritorious official. As the general that the Khan of Siberia relied on the most, Akmu was very proud and also very careful. He did not even send people to contact General Ulu. He decided to send a message after the attack tonight. This way, he could guarantee that he would take all the credit and not leak any information before the attack. It had to be said that this kind of consideration was very careful. But this time, the opponent was Yang Chendong. He was a war god who had carried out countless dangerous missions in both his previous life and this life. If they had to be compared, then one was the bright moon in the sky, and the other was the light of a firefly. There was no comparison at all. Even though Akmu used all his methods, none of his actions could escape from Yang Chendong's grasp. When he learned from his scouts that the Mongolian cavaliers had entered a resting state while he was 20 miles away, he predicted that they might come to ambush the camp at night. After calling Tian Hu, Beta Persei, and the others, Yang Chendong gave the order to meet the enemy tonight. The two people who admired Yang Chendong very much did not hesitate to turn around and make the arrangements. According to the agreement, once the Mongolian army made a move, Ba Daojiang, who followed Ulu, should send a message. But now, there was no news, so it was a bit hasty to prepare to meet the enemy. But the order was given by Yang Chendong, so no one doubted it. Time quickly passed from noon to afternoon, and then the sky slowly darkened. The scouts sent a message through the radio. The Mongolian cavalry had indeed begun to move. They had moved. After receiving this news, Beta Persei was not surprised at all. Since the young master said that they would come at night, then they would definitely come. Send a message to Ba Daojiang. Once the battle starts, tell them to surround Akmu from the back and try to kill as many enemies as possible. Yang Chendong said confidently with his hands behind his back. This time, he was not greedy to the point that he would not let even one enemy escape. After all, it was 10,000 cavalry, and he only had a little more than 10,000 troops. It would not be a problem to heavily injure the enemy, but it would be too difficult to kill them all. In other words, after this battle, the 5-star army's strength would be known to the Siberian Mongolian cavalry. As long as the enemy did not have a pig's brain, they would definitely think of a way to leave this place. Taking advantage of this opportunity, they would kill as many enemies as they could. The 5-star army had already made their preparations. They had dug a big hole and were only waiting for the enemy to walk into it. Akmu, who did not know this, was indeed walking step by step towards the abyss. After the sky darkened, Akmu, as the general, gave the order to attack. 10,000 Mongol cavalrymen got on their horses and charged over in a grand manner. causing the birds in the forest to fly into the air in a panic. They seemed to have sensed the powerful killing intent as well. It was only a distance of 20 miles, and the Mongolian vanguard, who had already planned out the best route, took less than an hour to reach the area 2 miles away from the Five-Star Army's camp. At this moment, the Five-Star Army's camp was in a state of panic. It gave people the feeling that they did not expect anyone to attack them at this moment. They were completely unprepared. Get into formation. When Akhmu arrived with the main force of the Mongolian cavalry, he also saw this scene. Immediately, his face was filled with joy. The chaos in the enemy camp made him look like a cat playing with a mouse. In order for the cavalry to unleash their full potential, they had to display their ferocious offensive abilities during the charge. Only by doing so would they be able to severely injure their opponents at the first moment and gain the initiative on the battlefield. This also required them to spread out in a formation that was dense enough and not obstructed each other at the same time to ensure that their combat strength could be better displayed. Chapter 1382. Charge. Akhmu, who saw that the formation had spread out, could not wait to give the order to charge. When the Mongol soldiers heard the horn, they shouted and rode their horses over. As the distance got closer and closer, they readied their bows and waited, aiming at the Five-Star Army soldiers wearing military green uniforms one after another. Shio, shio, shio. Shio, shio, shio. When the distance between the two sides reached the range of the arrows seemed to have grown eyes and shot toward the soldiers of the Five-Star Army, who were running back and forth in the camp without the need for any orders. In a short time, more than 100 Five-Star Army soldiers were killed or injured by the arrows. Such a glorious result greatly boosted the morale of the Mongol cavalry. This was especially true for the cavalrymen at the very front. They had already disregarded the formation and charged forward as if they would not be able to kill the enemy and gain merit if they were a step too late. The hope of victory had already made them lose their sight. These Mongolian cavaliers did not notice that the so-called five-star soldier they had killed actually looked very similar to them. In reality, these people were the Mongol captives that Yang Qindong had captured. Before the war, Yang Qindong had promised these people that if they were lucky enough to survive this war, they would be exempted from the death penalty. After that, they would only need to work in arching for 3 years before regaining their freedom. With the temptation of death in front of them, these surrendered soldiers had no choice but to fight. Almost 2,000 captives wanted to fight. However, the flames of war were merciless, and swords and spears had no eyes. Soon, more than 200 people were killed or injured, and this number was constantly increasing, causing waves of cries for help. Akhmu did not know about this. When he saw so many five-star army soldiers die in front of him, he was completely blinded by victory. At that moment, he seemed to see countless treasures piled up in front of him for him to take. Not only Akhmu, more and more Mongol cavalry were deeply stimulated by this temporary victory. They shouted and swung their swords. Sometimes there would even be laughter after they hit their targets. It's about time. Under a big tree at the periphery of the battlefield, Yang Qindong saw that the enemy's front and middle troops had entered the pocket. His eyes finally showed a hint of killing intent. He looked at Beta Persei beside him and said, "Blow the horn of charge." Beep, 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 beep. The loud horn suddenly sounded in the silent night. It was like a clap of thunder in the ears of the Mongol cavalry. After the bugle call sounded, the wooden planks around the camp of the five-star army were suddenly removed, revealing wide and long horse traps. The sharp treetops in the pits were like ogres with their bloody mouths wide open, waiting for their prey to enter. The sudden sound of the horn and the pits around them scared the Mongol cavalry who had already charged into the five-star army's camp. Their first thought they had fallen into a trap. They looked around like birds startled by the twang of a bow, and their eyes filled with fear. What's going on? As the commander of the army, Akhmu was also trapped in the camp. After the sudden change in the situation, his face turned completely gloomy. His years of experience on the battlefield told him that things were bad. But in front of so many soldiers, he didn't want to admit this. So after shouting, he looked at a wooden box placed in the tent and shouted, Men, pry open this box for this general. Yes. 2 soldiers stepped forward after receiving the order. Then, a hole was opened in the wooden box under the great force. Then, a cry of surprise sounded. This is an empty box. What? Empty? Akmu's face changed drastically. Then he pointed at the other wooden boxes and some jars and shouted, Open, open all of them. In an instant, a group of soldiers rushed forward. But the result was not good. The wooden boxes were all empty. There was something in the jars, but it was not wine. It was kerosene. Not good, it's kerosene. Be careful of a fire attack. Akmu cried out. As if to coordinate with him, countless torches suddenly appeared around the camp, illuminating the area as brightly as day. Countless cavalrymen were holding fire arrows, ready to fire. Surrender, and you can live. Those who resist will die. The voice of persuasion sounded out again. Beta Persei's loud voice was used again. Surrender? You must be dreaming. Looking around, he realized that all the soldiers behind him had already fled. Not only that, but the 5-star army around the tent had also fled at some point. Seeing that there was nothing to gain, Akmu shouted angrily, We have more people. Don't be afraid of them. Listen to my orders and charge out. He knew that he had sinned heavily. Once he was captured by the 5-star army, he would not have a good ending. Thus, Akmu decided to take a risk. After the commanding general gave the order, the soldiers were also encouraged. They shouted loudly and were about to charge out on their horses. However, before they could charge forward, Yang Er had already given the order to shoot. Following that, tens of thousands of arrows were released in unison, bringing with them countless sparks as they rained down on the camp. The curtains of the tents were flammable to begin with, and with the help of the kerosene, very soon, a huge net of fire rose from the places where the fire arrows landed, and it wrapped around the Mongolian cavaliers one after another. When a person was faced with fire, perhaps a person with mental fortitude could remain calm, but war horses could not. When their pupils were filled with flames, they went berserk. No matter how their master ordered them, they no longer obeyed. Instead, they each rushed towards the safe zone they thought was the safest place. The war horses that charged out, no matter which direction they went, were all waiting for them in the wide horse traps. The sound of wooden stakes entering flesh could be heard, and the war horses that were still alive just a moment ago turned into dead horses one after another. The Mongolian cavaliers riding on their backs did not fare much better either. Most of the time, they were buried with the war horses before they died. The fire was everywhere, and they could not stay there. There were also huge horse traps waiting for them outside. The Mongol cavalry were stuck in a dilemma. As the commander, Akim could not do anything. He could only watch as one soldier after another charged out and died in the pits. If they were surrounded by the fire, they would be burned to death. There were 8,000 Mongolian elite cavaliers, and other than the soldiers who were not part of the 5-star army, most of them died in this predicament where they could neither advance nor retreat. The fire burned for nearly an hour, causing the surroundings to be filled with the smell of roasted meat, which made people want to vomit. However, there were some who were lucky and did not die in the fire. After a full hour of torment, the fire around them gradually became smaller, and the surrounding horse traps were also filled with human and horse corpses. They finally saw the hope of charging out. Charge with me. Akmu, who saw the hope of survival, had a black face. Although his personal guards had tried their best to protect him from being burned to death, the smell of smoke and fire did not feel good. Now that he finally had a chance to show off his skills, he hollered out and was about to launch a counterattack. At this moment, Akmu had close to 1,000 soldiers who could still fight. There were also 2,000 to 3,000 injured soldiers. Although they couldn't win with these, it was still possible to carve out a path of blood. In the hearts of many Mongolian cavalry, they were invincible on their horses. They were like their ancestors, invincible on their horses. It was good to have confidence, but too much confidence was asking for death, especially when they were facing the elites of the 5-star army, who specialized in beating up the Mongolian cavalry. From the moment they charged, their fates were already decided. Soldiers, charge with me. Tian Hu had been waiting by the side, pulled out his 2 cavalry swords. He had wanted to experience the skills of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. If it was not for Yang Chendong's plan, he would have charged out long ago. Luckily, there were still a few thousand enemies left on the battlefield, which was enough for the number 1 cavalry army to practice their swords. A truly strong army did not depend on how hard they trained. Instead, they needed to have enough battle experience. Soldiers who had not been on the battlefield were all fake and could only be considered armchair strategists. Luckily, the world was huge, and there were many whetstones for the 5-star army. After Tian Hu gave the order, the cavalry surged out behind him. It was as if everyone knew that there was more soup than meat, and they were afraid that if they were late, they would not be able to obtain any merits. The wolves moved, and after the soldiers of the number 1 cavalry army charged, a killing intent filled the sky as they charged at the charging Mongolian cavalry. That killing intent seemed to have turned into a physical aura that charged into the enemy camp. For some reason, including Akmu, many of the Mongolian cavalry could not help but feel a chill run down their spines. This was the manifestation of the killing intent turning into a physical form. It was like a butcher. After killing so many pigs, even if they were alive, they could not help but shiver. The charge of the Mongolian cavalry did not stop because of this. They were like how they dealt with the small Russian tribes, spreading out and trying to use the wolf pack tactic to split up and win. Although they felt a chill in their bones when they charged, since they chose to charge, they would not stop for no reason. Arrow formation. Tian Hu, who was charging at the front, had no intention of stopping either. This was not the first time they had faced a pack of wolves, so they used the short arrow formation to charge forward as if they were familiar with it. Countless facts had proven that the Mongolian cavalry were not scary. They just needed to maintain their hearts and charge according to what they had learned in their training. Chapter 1383. This was one of the important instructions Yang Chendong gave to the army. When they faced a strong enemy, they were not to be easily moved by them. They would fight their own battles, and they would fight their own battles. They were not to change because of the enemy. If that happened, they would be giving up on their advantage and letting the enemy take advantage of them. In truth, this was often the treasure that decided the outcome of a battle between powerful players. When a weak player ran into a strong player, their rhythm would usually be messed up. In fact, to protect their lives, they would have no choice but to adapt to the enemy's fighting style. In the end, they would only have the strength to fight back and would not be able to attack at all. How could they not lose? On the other hand, if they fought in the style they were most familiar with, even though there was a high chance that they would lose, they could at least threaten the enemy. If they were lucky, it was not impossible for them to heavily injure the enemy and turn defeat into victory. As the strongest army among cold weapons and the world's best cavalier army that had just been expanded into an army, Commander Tian, who would often use Yang Chendong's words to teach his soldiers, along with the fact that they were stronger than the enemy to begin with and the morale they gained after winning. The moment both sides clashed, Akmu was shocked to find that he was about to lose. In terms of strength, the 5-star army waited patiently, and the Mongolian cavaliers who were attacking could not compare to them. In terms of weapons, the soldiers of the world's best cavalier army were all equipped with divine sabers, and their advantage was clear. As long as the enemy dared to fight against them head-on, they would be cut in half after 3 slashes, and they would not be able to continue fighting. In terms of morale, the Mongolian cavaliers had just suffered a great defeat, and all the soldiers were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow. On the other hand, the 5-star army had just obtained a great victory, and everyone's confidence was high. This made them even more decisive when they attacked, and the gap between them and the enemy increased by a large margin. When comparing them, the difference in strength was obvious. It could be said that before the battle even started, the victor had already been decided. A tiger had entered a pack of wolves, and it was not just one tiger, but a tiger that had more people than a pack of wolves. The pressure it brought to the Mongolian cavaliers could be easily seen. After fighting for around 15 minutes, Akmu was shocked to find that he could not even use half of the strength he had before. The number of casualties continued to increase, especially as the number of times they clashed increased. Many of the sabers in the Mongolian cavaliers' hands were cut in half, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of weapons. The speed at which they lost became even faster. Protect the general and open up a bloody path. Around a dozen of his remaining personal guards protected Akim. When they saw that the Mongolian cavaliers were about to leave, these personal guards shouted in unison and gathered together to charge out of the corner, surrounded by the 5-star army. "Let me do it!" A warhorse suddenly rushed out from Yang Chendong's side. Needless to say, that tall figure and that deafening voice belonged to none other than Beta Persei. Speaking of which, Beta Persei also had the courage of 1,000 men. He had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years and could receive pointers at any time. When it came to individual combat power, even in the 5-star army, there were few who could match him. Usually, he had to protect the safety of his 6th young master, so he did not have many chances to go to the battlefield. Now that the situation was set, he was itching to fight. When he saw that there were a dozen enemy cavaliers who wanted to escape, he did not hold back and immediately rode his horse away. The dozen Mongolian cavaliers were unusually fierce as they protected Akim and destroyed the path that the 5-star army had blocked. They formed a large force and charged out of the battlefield. To be able to become Akim's personal guards, their skills were naturally not bad. Although they did not create the 18 shadow guards or the 12 protectors, they were all strong men who could fight against 10 or even dozens of people. If they gathered their strength together, normal 5-star army soldiers would not be able to block them. This could be seen from the fact that they had only lost 4 people even though they had injured more than a dozen 5-star army cavaliers along the way. And just when they had already charged through a few blockade lines and were about to break out of the encirclement and escape, a war horse and a tall figure blocked their path. Without any warning, the person rushed in front of them and raised his saber to slash down. Waves of great force crashed into the sabers of the Mongolian personal guards, and a great pressure came from their arms. Cling, cling, clang, 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 clang. It was as if he had entered a realm where no one could stop him. Block, block, chop, lift, sweep, press. All sorts of attacks were displayed by Yang Er on horseback. His movements were quick and steady, and he suppressed the Mongolian cavaliers who seemed to be unstoppable a moment ago, to the point that they were forced to retreat. Fall! The saber slashed down fiercely and hit the chest of a Mongolian cavalier. The great force caused the cavalier's saber to break, and the blade was also wedged into the cavalier's sternum. The cavalier fell off his horse. "Get down from your horses." Once the saber was pulled out from the chest of a Mongolian cavalier, it was raised and flicked, and it hit another Mongolian cavalier who was charging at him. After the saber sliced through the cavalier's arm, another Mongolian cavalier cried out in pain and fell off his horse. Get down, all of you." The man and horse quickly weaved through the Mongolian cavaliers. His saber was like a nimble snake, and the Mongolian cavaliers around him were either cut down, flicked, or pressed down from their horses. No one was able to withstand a single blow from him. 6th young master, 2nd brother's strength has increased again. When the captain of the first team, Chiu Vi, saw this scene, he could not help but sigh in amazement. At the same time, he was eager to give it a try. Even though he could not compare to Beta Persei's position in Yang Chendong's eyes, because he was close to him, he had received a lot of pointers. He really wanted to go up and see how strong he was. Beta Persei is a person who is willing to work hard. Let's see. These people might not be enough for him to kill alone. Yang Chendong's gaze was like a torch, and he spoke with the gaze of a grandmaster. As the saying went, once an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Even though Beta Persei's strength was much weaker than his, normal Mongolian cavaliers could no longer stop him. Since Yang Chendong had said this, Chiu Vi could only suppress the thought of going up to help Beta Persei. Then, he stared at the battlefield with his eyes wide open. He wanted to learn how Beta Persei fought. Many times, watching a battle between experts was also an experience of enlightenment, and it was also a rare opportunity. In the battlefield, Beta Persei killed more than 10 Mongolian cavaliers in a short period of time and finally faced off against General Akhmu. As the great general of Siberia, Khan Hurahan, Akhmu did not rely on flattery to get to his position. He was a person with real instincts. Before he met the five-star army. No, it should be said that before he fell into the trap tonight, Akhmu was very arrogant. In his eyes, the Han people were as weak as sheep. They were not even as weak as the Russians who dared to resist them from time to time. Since the five-star army was mainly made up of Han people, there was no such thing as being strong or powerful. As long as he arrived with the army, one charge would be enough to scare the opponent. Then, it would be the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, and the pursuit of the enemy would be a great victory. It was precisely because he thought that everything was too simple and too easy. When he found out that he was surrounded, Akhmu was shocked. He finally knew that the Han people he faced this time were different from the Han people in the past. They had some ability. However, this ability was nothing more than relying on schemes and trickery to win. If it was face-to-face, blade-to-blade, he was confident that he would be able to beat the crap out of these Han people. As a result, there was the scene of him leading the army to counterattack. Then, the confidence in his heart was thrown away one by one. What did they mean that he accidentally fell into a trap? What did they mean that the Han people were weak and easy to bully? Right now, Akhmu only wanted to kill all those who had spread the news. If the Han people were easy to bully, then who was the one who beat him up? After failing time and time again, breaking through the bottom line of his heart, Akhmu no longer had the heart to fight against the five-star army. This was because he found that even if there were no schemes or traps, he would not be able to gain any advantage against the five-star army. The only difference was that the other party would have to pay a higher price. However, the result of the battle could not be changed. He would definitely lose, and the Han people would win. If he could escape this time, Akhmu would definitely tell Great Khan Hulahan to retreat as far away as possible from the five-star army. The Han people were simply devils, executioners who killed without batting an eyelid. On the contrary, they were like clowns who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They were so ignorant, so arrogant, and so reckless. However, it was clearly too late for him to think of all this at this time. At this time, Akhmu was already a little scared. If it was possible, if he was not a great general, perhaps he would choose to surrender in order to survive. However, at this time, he had no other choice. With the trust and support that Hulahan had given him over the years, even if he had to fight to the death, he would not say a word about surrendering. Yang Er's chest heaved up and down as he went on a killing spree. After all, he had killed and injured more than a dozen people, so his physical strength was somewhat depleted. Even so, when facing Akhmu, he was still full of pride and said, "Seeing that you are still a general, I will give you a chance. If you don't want to die, surrender." Different from the cloth armor that the other Mongolian cavalry wore, Akhmu wore metal armor. Moreover, it was not the half-metal armor that normal soldiers wore. Instead, it was a full metal armor that protected his body. Just based on this, his identity should not be simple. Beta Persei wanted to capture this person alive. It would be a great achievement. Looking at Beta Persei, Akhmu quickly shook his head. "You are very strong, but this general will never surrender. My soul has long returned to Tungri. Even if you kill me now, it will not be long before I will be a hero again." "Tungri, my ass," Beta Persei muttered. He had long known from Yang Chundong that the so-called Tungri was like the god that the Han people talked about. It was a kind of belief and a kind of spiritual support. It did not exist at all. Of course, he also knew that many Mongolians respected Tungri. If anyone said anything bad about them, they would immediately become the public enemy. He would not do such a stupid thing. Chapter 1384. Beta Persei's eyes became brighter as he cursed Akhmu's ignorance in his heart. "Since he won't surrender, then I'll just kill him. I hope he's not too weak so I can fight to my heart's content." Slowly raising his sword and arm, Beta Persei assumed a posture of a life and death battle. Similarly, Akmu also raised his saber and raised it high up in the air. When their eyes met, the word kill came out of their mouths almost at the same time. Then the warhorses under both sides let out a neigh, and the two men quickly approached each other. One was the great general of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. He held a high position, was unusually brave, and had experienced hundreds of battles. The other was the leader of the five-star army. He was a close subordinate of Yang Xie's leader, Yang Chendong. He had extraordinary strength, and the power of his sword was mighty. The so-called strongest of the strongest referred to them. In the process of rushing, when the warhorses crossed, the two sabers quickly collided and separated in an instant. In the first round, they were evenly matched, and it looked like they were evenly matched. After galloping for a distance, the two men turned their horses around and stared at each other. After the exchange, the two men didn't seem any different from before. But if one looked carefully, they could still see the differences. For example, Beta Persei's indifferent face, the tension in Akmu's eyes, and his slightly trembling right arm. With the advantage of the weapon, Yang Er, who was holding the heavenly saber, could release all of his strength to the maximum when fighting. He didn't have to worry about the weapon breaking down. In contrast, Akmu couldn't do the same. After seeing the scene of many soldiers' weapons being broken, he was afraid of the five-star army sabers. This made him not dare to use all his strength in the fight, because he wasn't sure if the saber in his hand was strong enough to break in two. The fear in his heart and the inability to use all his strength weakened his momentum and confidence by at least 30%. In a battle between experts, a small mistake could be fatal. Who would dare to not use their full strength? It could be said that with the advantage of the toughness of the weapon, Beta Persei had already gained the upper hand before the battle even began. The tremendous force behind the blow had already caused Akmu's arm to feel sore and numb, showing signs of defeat. Haha, you and I had a fair fight. How delightful. Again, Beta Persei laughed heartily as he felt the exhilaration of releasing his power. After a loud shout, he urged his horse forward. Fair my ass. Akmu cursed in his heart. Due to the disadvantage of his weapon, he didn't dare to use his full strength. Naturally, he couldn't display his full strength. Now that he saw Beta Persei rushing over again, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and charge forward. Ding ding dang dang dang. After another clash, Beta Persei laughed again and launched another charge, forcing Akmu to passively attack again and again. In just a short while, the two sides had clashed for at least 10 rounds. Finally, the saber in Akmu's hand broke into two. Although the quality of the weapon in his hand was extraordinary as a supreme general, there was still a huge gap between his weapon and Yang Xie's more mature forging skills. It was already very difficult for him to hold on until now. Not only that, because he didn't dare to use his full strength, Akmu had been enduring the tremendous force from Beta Persei on his wrist. At this time, his right arm had become red and swollen, and it was difficult for him to even lift the saber. Hey, why did your saber break by itself? Are you afraid of your grandfather? Well, if that's the case, why don't you surrender? You seem to have some ability. If you surrender, your grandfather will spare your life. How about it? Beta Persei seemed to have just noticed the other party's broken saber and said jokingly. Akmu's face was flushed red. He was furious and infuriated. After so many years of fighting, this was the first time he heard that a saber could be afraid of people. Knowing that Beta Persei was humiliating him, Akmu glared at him and said, "If you want to fight, then fight. You're a vile person with a sharp tongue. You're courting death." Seeing that Akmu still had no intention of surrendering, Beta Persei was also enraged. After a roar, he urged his horse to charge again. This time, he wouldn't hold back and vowed to cut down his opponent. Beta Persei wasn't worried about whether or not he could kill Akmu. Since the young master didn't say anything to stop him, it wouldn't be a problem to kill this person. Since that was the case, he didn't have any worries and just focused on fighting with all his might. Akmu held half of the saber in his hand, and his expression was ugly. but he didn't have the slightest intention of surrendering. A general had died in 100 battles. Since he had won the war, he had to be prepared to die. He only hated himself for being careless this time. Not only did he not have long to live, but he also implicated nearly 10,000 soldiers to die here. In the end, he still failed to live up to the Khan's trust. Akmu, who already had the intention to die, didn't have any more worries. The worst outcome was nothing more than death. How could a person who wasn't even afraid of death be afraid of Beta Persei's saber? Akmu, who was holding half of the saber in his hand, charged forward without any intention of dodging. He launched the last attack of his life. Beta Persei finally felt that something was wrong. As the distance between the two sides got closer and closer, the other party didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. There was only an indomitable momentum and an attitude of mutual destruction. Beta Persei, who didn't want to die with Akmu, had no choice but to change the direction of his saber midway. The saber also changed from a slash to a sweep and fiercely slapped Akmu's body. The powerful saber slapped Akmu's chest, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Even a tree branch could exert a great amount of power, let alone a saber. Blood gushed out of Akmu's mouth as he was struck. Akmu forcefully gathered his strength and swept his saber across Yang Second's black armor, leaving a mark on it. But it was only a shallow mark. The attack range of the broken saber was limited, which allowed Beta Persei to escape. After noticing the saber mark on the armor, Beta Persei first took a deep breath. He didn't dare to imagine what the result would be if the other party didn't use a broken saber, but a whole saber. In other words, he was almost injured by the other party. If he wanted to kill his own people, he had to kill them first. Beta Persei would not allow a defeated general to threaten him. After shouting angrily, he raised his saber and slashed back. This slash used almost 90% of his strength. Akmu, who had just swung his saber and used up all his strength, had a regretful expression on his face. He was so close to beheading the general of the 5-star army. Just as he was feeling regretful, he felt a cold wind coming from above his head. When he raised his head again, a sharp saber was falling towards his head. It was already dark. Although there were torches around, it was still difficult to see. Akmu only saw the shadow of a saber flash above his head, and then an indescribable pain attacked his whole body. After struggling for a while, Akmu's chest suddenly split open and blood gushed out. Then, he lowered his head and saw that his body had been split in half. Akmu's nose twitched as he could no longer breathe in oxygen. His body trembled a few times before he fell off the horse and onto the ground, forever losing his consciousness and senses. Who? Beta Persei, who had killed Akmu, let out a long sigh. Reality told him that if he underestimated any opponent, he would have to pay a heavy price. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party was holding a broken blade, the one who would be lying on the ground right now would be him. With Akmu killed, the other Mongol soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were either killed or surrendered. Before the sun rose, the battle had already ended. Of the 8,000 Mongol cavalry that charged into the ambush, not a single one managed to escape. The battle on the main battlefield had already ended. Outside the Amuga River, the battle was still ongoing. When the 2,000 Mongol cavalry saw that the main force of the army had fallen into the 5-star army's trap, they turned around and fled. The previous scene had already told them that tonight's ambush had failed. It was not difficult for the 8,000 Mongol cavalry to not be able to escape. Chapter 1385. Arching City. 3 days later, when Kagan Hulahan was still waiting for good news from General Akmu, an unexpected piece of news was delivered to him. When the cavalry who had escaped from the front lines knelt down in front of him and described the situation at the front lines, Hulahan felt the sky darken, and he almost fainted. Akmu had actually been defeated. Not only that, but his own life and death were unknown. Of the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry under him, less than 400 had returned. This result was completely out of Hulahan's expectations. Since the five-star army only had 10,000 people, even if they could not win, they should be able to retreat safely. They were the Mongolian cavalry, a race that had grown up on horseback. Compared to the Hans, who were not good at riding, they had a natural advantage. In fact, many times on the battlefield, they looked down on their Hans opponents. Houlihan fainted. His subordinates tried to save him, pinching his philtrum and splashing cold water on him, before finally waking him up. After waking up, Houlihan first accepted the fact that they had lost, but he still did not believe that Akmu would be fine. He was very clear about Akmu's abilities, and ordinary people would not be able to catch him. Furthermore, he had a large army, so he believed that he would definitely be able to break out of the encirclement. Just as Houlihan regained his composure, Belinsky walked in from outside the door. He first bowed to Houlihan and then asked with concern, "I heard that the Great Khan is not feeling well. I have already found the best doctor in the city. They are waiting outside the residence and can examine the Great Khan at any time." "No need, this Khan's body is very good." Houlihan waved his hand. He did not trust the Han's doctors, not to mention that he was not sick. He had only fainted because he was too anxious. However, no matter what, Belinsky had good intentions. This time, they were able to take down Arching City because of him. A look of hesitation flashed across Houlihan's face, but he quickly said with determination, "Let me tell you something. General Akmu fell into the Han's trap and lost the battle." "What?" Belinsky's expression changed when he heard this. He was indeed unaware of this news. After all, news of Akmu's death had only just reached the city. This news caused Belinsky's expression to change drastically. At the same time, he asked suspiciously, "Great Khan, is this true? Was this news personally sent by General Akmu? But where's the general now?" "The news didn't come from Akmu. It came from the cavalry he brought with him. Don't worry, this news is reliable. The battle is definitely won. As for Akmu's whereabouts, even I don't know." While shaking his head, Houlihan angrily slammed the table and said, "The five-star army has gone too far. They actually dare to set a trap for me. They are truly despicable. This enmity must be avenged." Houlihan did have a reason to be angry. No one would be in a good mood after being taught a lesson by someone they had always looked down on. But why didn't he think about it? If he hadn't targeted the Far Eastern Army first, how could the five-star army find trouble with him so quickly? Houlihan was still sulking. Belinsky indeed wouldn't. Although he was a merchant, it was because of this that he placed benefits and safety more than anyone else. The Mongol cavalry was known as a race on horseback. They had always been the ones to kill. When had they ever been killed or lost a battle? At the very least, from what he knew, when the Russian tribes faced the Mongol cavalry, they had mostly lost. The five-star army was actually so powerful that they could defeat the elite Mongol cavalry. Didn't that mean they were even more powerful? He had actually offended such a powerful person. Didn't that mean he was no longer safe? No, I have to leave. I have to leave the five-star army. In this chaotic world, Belinsky, who had always viewed his life as the most important, quickly made a decision. In order to leave this place safely, he had to ask Houlihan to bring him along. Otherwise, whether it was in the Far East or in the Siberian region, he would not have a foothold in the future. Belinsky, who had made up his mind, looked at Houlihan and organized his words before saying, "Great Khan, the five-star army is so powerful. We shouldn't fight them head-on." "HM, what? Do you really think this Khan is afraid of them?" This time, they only defeated Akmu because they schemed. Even if they can win, they must have suffered heavy losses. Now, this Khan still has more than 15,000 elite cavalry. This Khan is still confident that we can defeat them. Houlihan wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Although his bloodline wasn't pure and he couldn't be considered a member of the Golden family, he was still a descendant of Genghis Khan. He was still very proud in his bones. Seeing that Houlihan was still so stubborn, Belinsky scolded him for being stupid in his heart. On the surface, he had to put on a serious expression and said, "The Great Khan's might is naturally not something that the Han people can match. However, the problem now is that not only do we have the five-star army as our enemy, we also have the Far Eastern army behind us. Previously, we were unprepared and caught them off guard, so they had no choice but to hide. However, now that their reinforcements are here, they will definitely jump out and become enemies with the Great Khan. When that time comes, the Great Khan won't have any advantage in terms of military strength. Even if we can win in the end, the Great Khan's strength will also be heavily injured. In that case, if other forces enter this place, what will we use to defend against them? Houlihan wanted to say that as long as he was here, they wouldn't be defeated by the 5-star army. However, after considering that if they really won an Pyrrhic victory, once their strength was severely damaged, it was inevitable that there would be despicable people who would target them. There were no laws here, nor was there any so-called justice. Everything was based on the law of the jungle, where the strong preyed on the weak. If they didn't have enough strength, then they deserved to be bullied. Houlihan wouldn't watch his strength be damaged and be looked down upon by others. If that was the case, what was the use of occupying Arching? Thinking of this, his thoughts of fighting to the death with the 5-star army couldn't help but waver. Seeing that Houlihan didn't say anything, Belinsky knew that his suggestion was effective. He immediately followed up, "Great Khan, the Han people have a saying, where there is life, there is hope. As long as the Great Khan is still here, this one is still here. If you and I work together, I will provide the money and you'll provide the manpower." The Han people also have a saying, "It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge." Today, the 5-star army made us suffer. Let's remember this first. We will get our revenge sooner or later. As Belinsky consoled him, he also repeated his own importance. In the end, he was telling Houlihan that he was very important and that he had to bring him along when he left. Houlihan, who didn't think too much, didn't know what Belinsky was thinking. He was only considering whether Belinsky's words were correct. Just like how Belinsky valued his own life, Belinsky naturally didn't want to die. Not only that, he also valued his own strength. Since he was young, he had seen too many unfair things. He also respected the truth, which was that the one with the biggest fist was the absolute truth. As long as you had enough strength, you could set the rules. On the other hand, if you were weak, even if what you said was correct, no one would listen to you. He thought about how he wasn't the only armed force in Siberia, and he wasn't even the only Great Khan. If his strength was weakened too much, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have a place to stay when he returned this time. Since he wasn't confident that he could win, and there wouldn't be enough benefits even if he won, why would he fight this battle? Instead of taking the risk, it was better to retreat first. Just like what Belinsky said, he should preserve his strength first. Revenge could wait until he was stronger, right? Okay. After thinking it through, Houlihan slapped his thigh and said, "You're right. We don't have to fight to the death with the 5-star army. Since that's the case, why don't we retreat first? How about this? This Khan will immediately order the army to prepare to leave. When the time comes, we won't leave anything behind for the 5-star army. This Khan wants to leave them a mess and give them a headache." Belinsky heaved a sigh of relief when Houlihan finally thought it through. However, when he heard that Houlihan wanted to openly retreat, he stopped him and said, "Great Khan, you can't do that. If we leave now, we will definitely leak the news. What if the 5-star army and the Far Eastern army join forces and chase after us? What do you think we should do?" Arhan didn't think about this problem and was a bit stunned when he was asked this. If we leave, then we leave. In the past, when we retreated from a place, it was always like this. With a big order, the army would move out and grab everything that they could see and use. Why did they have to do something so complicated this time? Arhan was confused, so Belinsky knew that he had to explain some things to him. "Great Khan, the current situation is like this. We just lost to the 5-star army. Once the news leaks out, the morale of the army will definitely fall. If the hidden Far Eastern army also knows about this, they will take advantage of the situation and come out. What can we do? If they join forces with the 5-star army and attack us from two sides, even if we can leave, we will have to pay a price. Even if we leave, we can only leave quietly. Before we leave, we can also remove some unstable factors in the army." Unstable factors? Houlihan didn't understand what the other party was talking about. Chapter 1386. Belinci sighed in his heart. This Houlihan might be good at fighting and killing, but when it came to scheming and plotting, he was a far cry from that. It was probably because there was no one else in the Mongolian army that he was able to get the position. Great Khan, Tang Sheng is a surrendered general, but he has not truly joined us. Before, it was only because we captured his tribesmen and forced him to join us. Now that he's with his clansmen, no one knows if he'll really listen to us. People like him are unstable elements in the army. Since that's the case, why don't we leave him here and let him lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern army? Isn't that killing two birds with one stone? After he leaves, our army will leave the city. At that time, it will be the Han people's problem. If they want to kill each other, we can just kill them. There will be no losses for us. What do you think, Great Khan? After finally speaking his thoughts, Belinci looked into Houlihan's eyes with anticipation. HM? That makes sense. Houlihan took a while to digest these words, then nodded his head heavily. He was a selfish person and would not easily trust others. In his eyes, the remaining 15,000 Mongol cavalry were the most loyal. Even Belinci could be abandoned at any time, let alone Tang Sheng. If it was not for the fact that Tang Sheng still held the authority of the 2nd Cavalry Division, he would not even look at him. Now that he could leave safely by abandoning Tang Sheng, it was definitely worth it. He nodded and said, "That's fine. I'll leave this matter to you. The sooner, the better." Yes. Belinci nodded heavily. Although he was not willing to do such a thing, if he left it to Houlihan, it could easily cause problems. For his own safety and the safety of his assets, he had to do it personally. After leaving the Great Khan's residence, Belinci went straight to Tang Sheng's residence. Ever since his clansmen had been found and sent to All City, Tang Sheng had arranged for them to stay in his courtyard, along with some of his personal guards. Although the courtyard was not big, there were quite a few people. There were close to 500 people. When Belinci arrived, he felt that it was very lively. When Belinci arrived, Tang Sheng, who had received the news, immediately came to welcome him. The two of them went to the study and asked everyone to leave. When Tang Sheng saw Belinci's cautious expression, he had a bad feeling. Until the other party spoke, he knew that his premonition was not wrong. "General Tang, a great disaster is about to befall you," Belinci said with a long sigh, as if he was very concerned about Tang Sheng. "Why?" Tang Sheng was so shocked that he stood up from his chair with a look of horror on his face. Ever since he rebelled against the Far Eastern army, Tang Sheng hadn't had a good night's sleep. As a traitor, especially before his old master was killed, he needed to be on guard against revenge and all kinds of methods that could be used against him. Especially in the past few days, the entire All City had been in chaos. The people living here, whether it was their personal safety or their property, were greatly threatened. Facing the Mongol cavalry, who only knew how to plunder and didn't know how to manage and produce, the people were already complaining and dissatisfied. Sometimes, even he would feel angry when he saw the Mongol cavalry's actions. They were simply a group of bandits who didn't talk reason and only did things based on their emotions. They didn't care about the people's feelings at all. However, because they had cavalry swords in their hands that could kill, the people didn't dare to say anything. Because of this, many people vented their anger on him. Even though he also held a certain amount of military power, the people weren't bold enough to attack his residence, and no one dared to truly make a move against him. However, when he walked on the streets, he could still feel the unconcealed anger of the people when they looked at him with gazes. He had offended the Far Eastern army, offended the people in the city, and the 5-star army had sent reinforcements. It would be strange if Tang Sheng was in a good mood. As a result, there were many times when he began to doubt whether his actions back then were right or wrong. For the sake of his less than 200 clansmen, he had betrayed the interests of tens of thousands of Far East soldiers and hundreds of thousands of people. Did he do something wrong? While he was reflecting on himself, Tang Sheng was also very afraid of death. He was afraid that some people who couldn't touch the Mongol cavalry would target him. Therefore, when he went out, he doubled the number of guards. Even when he slept at home, he arranged many guards outside to protect him. However, even so, he was still unable to sleep until dawn. Often, the slightest movement would wake him up. Now that Belinsky had come and said that he was in trouble, how could he not be afraid? Mr. Tang, what's going on? Back then, I listened to you and rebelled against the Far Eastern Army. Now, you can't leave me alone. Tang Sheng suddenly grabbed Belinsky's arm and said with a pleading expression, "Don't be agitated, don't be agitated." Belinsky was in a good mood. Originally, he thought that it would take some effort to scare Tang Sheng. But now, it seemed that he was simply a bird that was startled by the twang of a bow. So the following things would be much easier. After patting Tang Sheng's arm and making a comforting gesture, Belinsky frowned. After thinking for a while, he said to Tang Sheng, who was listening seriously, "General Tang, I'm sure you can tell that the Khan is a suspicious person. He doesn't really trust you, right?" "Yes." Tang Sheng nodded. Half of his blood was Han Chinese. Just based on this, it would be extremely difficult to make Hulahan trust him. "Yes, the Khan is somewhat suspicious of you. Previously, someone went to the Khan and complained to him, saying that you only surrendered to the Khan on the surface, but secretly had other thoughts and that you were still in contact with the Far Eastern Army." "No, absolutely not." Tang Sheng, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again with a thump. His face was red. This time, he was really anxious. The feeling of being wronged was not good. He would never admit to something he did not do. "Don't worry. Your subordinate will speak. Your subordinate will speak." Belinsky comforted him again, then said, "I absolutely trust the general. You have already stabbed the Far Eastern Army. How could you still be in contact with them? I also went to the Khan about this matter and told him that you are innocent." Thank you, thank you." Tang Sheng wiped the sweat on his forehead and said gratefully, "Don't thank me. In fact, this matter is not over. I only temporarily dispelled the Khan's suspicion of you. If you want the Khan to completely believe you, you still need to do something." Belinsky began to lead the topic to the trap. Sure enough, when he heard that there was a solution, Tang Sheng asked with a face full of curiosity, "Please teach me, Mr. Tang. I can't say that I'll teach you, but if the general can lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army, wouldn't that be the best way to prove yourself? At that time, once you can capture the Far Eastern Army's commander, or even severely injure the Far Eastern Army, who would dare to doubt you? At that time, not only will the Khan completely trust you, it is also possible that he will give you great power." When he heard that he had to become enemies with the Far Eastern Army, Tang Sheng's face immediately turned ugly. When Belinsky instigated him to rebel, he said that it would be best if he could capture Qinbo. If he couldn't, he only needed to open the gates of Arching. In the future, he wouldn't need to do anything to deal with the Far Eastern Army. But now, it was a different story. Tang Sheng wanted to remind the other party of the promise he made to him. But after thinking about it, what was the point of saying it? Right now, Hulahan didn't trust him. If he didn't quickly solve this problem, who knew when the Mongolian cavalry would visit his home? If that happened, would he and his clansmen still have a way to live? There was no choice. It wasn't a matter of whether he was willing or not, but he had to do it. Otherwise, a disaster would be right in front of him. Phew! Tang Sheng exhaled. His face didn't look good, but there were still some things that needed to be said and some promises that needed to be made. "Mr. Tang, since doing this can eliminate the Khan's suspicion of me, I will lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army." Belinsky was very happy that Tang Sheng agreed so easily. But in order to make sure that the other party didn't do nothing, he continued to promise. "That's good. If that's the case, no one will be able to slander the general. That's right, the general only needs to lead the troops. I will ask the Khan to send troops to help you. When the time comes, we will deal with the Far Eastern Army and have done a great service. I hope the general won't forget my contribution." Of course, of course. Tang Sheng was relieved when he heard that the Mongolian cavalry would help him. He had hidden many spies in the Far Eastern Army. Those people were like him, not pure Han people. They wouldn't be loyal to the Far Eastern Army. With these spies and the help of the 2nd Cavalry Division and the Mongolian soldiers, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with the Far Eastern Army that had already been discovered. Tang Sheng agreed and personally sent Belinsky out of the residence with a look of gratitude. At the same time, He promised that he would gather the troops now and leave the city tomorrow morning to find the far eastern army. Good news would come soon. Tang Xing didn't know that he had been completely used by Belinsky and abandoned by Hulahan. He had become an abandoned pawn and had to cover for the Mongolian army's departure. It could be said that he had made the best use of everything. Chapter 1387. Belinsky happily went to see Hulahan. First, he explained Tang Sheng's attitude. Then he suggested that the moment Tang Sheng left the city the next day, they would seal the city and loot the entire city. They would take everything that could be used or taken away and quickly leave this place. They would return to Siberia to recuperate and prepare for the next battle. Hulahan happily accepted Belinsky's suggestion. However, at the same time, he was also alarmed. This merchant was too cunning, so much so that he had to be wary. He even wondered if he could kill this merchant if he had the chance. When the time came, he would be able to obtain the merchant's wealth and avoid a huge danger. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Unfortunately, Belinsky did not know this. He was still fantasizing about how he could expand his caravan in Siberia with Hulahan's support. He even thought that without Akmu, Hulahan would be in urgent need of talents. He should have the ability to take over this position. This was the difference between a merchant and a ruthless person. Merchants thought more about benefits and how to make use of each other in a win-win situation. Ruthless people were different. They mostly did things based on their hearts. Once they realized that there was danger, they would kill without any reason. As for the consequences, that was something to be discussed in the future. As for Tang Sheng, after receiving Belinsky's reminder, he began to gather his troops that afternoon. After bringing enough rations for 5 days, he bade farewell to his clansmen early the next morning and led his troops out of Arching. Not long after he left the city gates were closed. At the same time, they began to loot. In order not to attract attention, there was no fire in the city. Everything that could be looted was looted, and those that could not be taken away were smashed. For a time, the city was in a mess. Even General Tang Sheng's residence did not escape. Belinsky personally led the army to charge in, and then there was a round of looting. Tang Sheng was a division commander. When he chased Bo and the others away, he took a lot of good things. Now, they were all in the treasury. Now, Belinsky had benefited from them. When they saw the boxes of good things being carried out of the Tang residence, the clansmen who stayed behind to guard the residence could not take it anymore. They all went forward to stop these actions. This made Belinsky unhappy. Since he had decided to go all the way, he gave the order, and the Mongol cavalry began to kill. Very quickly, the Tang manor was filled with blood, and the stench of blood filled the air. Even after all of the clansmen had died, many of them still had their eyes wide open, as if they had died with a grievance. They really couldn't imagine that the person who came to the residence yesterday and was sent away by Tang Sheng with endless gratitude would suddenly reveal killing intent today and kill all of them. What exactly was going on? The chaos in all city also affected the intelligence personnel of the 5-star army in the city. However, because some of them were dressed like beggars and had no money, they did not attract the attention of the Mongolian soldiers. When the situation in the city became more and more chaotic, the intelligence personnel used a new battery that had just been sent into the city to turn on the radio and broadcast the situation outside. At this moment, Yang Qindong was leading his army towards Arching. At this time, the number of troops had reached nearly 20,000. Apart from the 10,000 soldiers, there were also many Mongol captives as well as many Russian clansmen nearby. 3 battles, 3 victories, and Yang Qindong used his actions to prove the strength of the 5-star army. He also attracted the respect of some hot-blooded Russians like Nikolaev. They had even expressed their desire to join the 5-star army. Once they entered Archung, they would be able to achieve their wish. This was Yang Qindong. No matter what the situation was, he could always make the troops grow like a snowball. In the end, they would become a colossus that would strike fear into the bones of all his opponents. As the army was advancing, the intelligence report from Arching was sent over. When the telegram was sent to Yang Qindong, His first thought was that the enemy was about to run. Tell Commander Tian who to come over immediately. The target had been exposed, so it was time to start a fire. Under the constant cooling, Chun Bo fell into a deep sleep once again. This time, it was different from the past. Chun Bo had really fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, and his body's vital signs were also constantly recovering. It was only a matter of time before his body fully recovered. As for the military matters of the Far Eastern Army, before Chun Bo fell asleep, he gave all the power to Commander Dai Qua. As the person who followed Yang Shindong to the Far East, Dai Qua had seen the strength of the five-star army. His loyalty to Yang Shindong was not something that the other commanders could compare to. Chun Bo was relieved to give the power to this person. After Dai Qua obtained the military power, the first thing he did was to take out the tiger talisman that Chun Bo gave him. He sent someone to inform the 3rd Cavalry Division and the 5th Cavalry Division. He also allowed Commander Kong He to return to the army and lead the 2nd Cavalry Division to gather at the military headquarters. Even if there are unstable elements in the army, it should only be a small part. It is time to expose them. Commander Dai Qua waved his hand and gave such a military order. There was nothing to be afraid of if there were pustules in the body. What was scary was that they did not dare to squeeze them out. Doing so would only make the problem worse. Since the 6th young master had already arrived with the army, even if these people jumped out, they would not be able to do anything. What was there to be afraid of? Out of his absolute trust in Yang Shindong, Dai Qua let the army assemble without worry. He wanted to see who would jump out and who would court death. At the same time, he also sent a report to Yang Shindong, informing him that the Far Eastern Army was not very stable and asking for reinforcements. Yang Shindong had thought a lot about the problem of the Far Eastern Army on the way here. Considering that he was entering alone, in order to expand the army, the political review of the source of soldiers was not so strict. As a result, there were all kinds of people mixed in. This was something he could understand, but understanding was not giving in. They ate his food and took his salary, but they wanted to rebel against his master. If he did not punish them well, where would the justice be? He handed over the task of getting rid of the traitors to Beta Persei and allocated 1,000 men from the 2nd Battalion of the Black Cavalry and 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Army. He wanted to deal with the unstable elements in the army with a thunderous force. Since he came to the Far East, a fortress like the first city would definitely be built here. After Beta Persei received the order, he quickly left with the army after Tian Hu left. Yang Shindong led the rest of the army straight to Arching. It was already chaotic there. The earlier they arrived, the earlier they could end the chaos there. After Dai Qua received Yang Shindong's reply, he was full of confidence. The stage had been set up, and the next step was to see how those people with bad intentions would act. Tang Sheng brought more than 8,000 men from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division to the military forest where Chun Bo was. What made people speechless was that this army was still wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army. This was also a helpless move. Although they surrendered to the Mongolian army with their division commander, the other party was too poor. They were so poor that they did not have any uniform at all. They had no choice but to gather here wearing the old military uniform. Wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army, they were now going to fight the 5-star army. The sarcasm was very obvious. The direct experience was that the morale of the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division was very low. Most of the soldiers' faces flashed with confusion. Not everyone was as ungrateful as Tang Sheng. These soldiers were all from poor families, and many of them were Russian men who had been bullied by the Mongolian cavalry. It was Chun Bo who had built Al City after arriving in the Far Eastern region. He gave them food to eat so that they would not starve to death and did not have to worry about their safety. Although Chun Bo didn't bring the families of these soldiers to Al City for the sake of the overall stability of the situation, causing them to have a lot of worries in the future. However, their monthly wages were not little, and they were never late. With this money, they could buy some things in the city to support their own tribes. This was already something that made them feel very proud. Many warriors were still thinking that when the boys in their tribes grew up to be men, they would bring them to All City to join the army, so that they could better support their tribes. However, they did not expect Tang Sheng to betray them. When they received the news, many of the soldiers could not understand, and no one was willing to rebel with him. However, it was at this time that Tang Sheng stood up, saying that once they and the Mongolian army took over Al City, they could bring their tribes into the city and live a good life together. It was because of this that the soldiers were appeased, and they had no choice but to stand together with their enemies, the Mongolian cavalry. Tang Sheng had indeed kept his promise. After successfully chasing Chun Bo out of Al City, he agreed to let the soldiers bring their tribes into the city. However, what no one expected was that the current arching was no longer the arching of the past. The city had long since fallen under the control of the Mongol army. The series of measures that General Chinbo had set for the citizens had all disappeared, and no one followed them. There were many smashing, killing, robbing, and pillaging within the city, and sometimes it was even more chaotic than outside. Under such circumstances, who would bring their own tribes into the city? Wouldn't that be like sending sheep into a tiger's den? It was also at this time that Tang Sheng stood up again, saying that the chaos would end soon. As long as the Mongols weren't stupid, Al City would return to peace. Everyone just needed to wait patiently, and Al City would become a true refuge for everyone. In order for this day to come sooner, they needed to eliminate the Far East Army first. They had to get rid of this big problem first. It was under such circumstances that the 4th Cavalry Division left Al City, following Tang Sheng to 50 miles north of the city. They acted as if they were going to attack the Far Eastern Army headquarters. Tang Sheng, who had just arrived, met up with the Mongol commander, Uru, and learned that the Far East Army, which had been hidden for many days, was gathering here. Uru welcomed Tang Sheng's arrival very much. There were only 2,000 Mongolian cavalry here. Although they felt that their fighting strength was not bad, the Far Eastern Army was said to have tens of thousands of soldiers. In terms of numbers, the difference was still too great. Chapter 1388. Tang Sheng's arrival was not just a matter of increasing the number of soldiers by nearly 10,000. This person was once a division commander of the Far East Army and had many old friends in the army. If this matter was handled well, turning an enemy into a friend, how much help would he gain? General Tang, we will launch the attack tomorrow. When the time comes, both sides will be at the foot of the mountain. I hope that the general can use his glib tongue to gain merit before the battle. At that time, I will truthfully report everything I see to the Khan, Ulu said with a fake smile on his face. He was reminding and also warning Tang Sheng that tomorrow's battle was very important and that he must do his best. Your praise will also be known to the Khan. You must not miss such an opportunity to gain merit. Yes, this general understands. Tang Sheng cupped his fists and said with a very humble attitude. Although the other party was not as good as him in terms of numbers, the other party was a Mongolian general. In comparison, he was far inferior. He had no choice but to flatter the other party. Ulu left the tent, leaving Tang Sheng behind to think about some information about the officers of the Far Eastern Army. If he wanted to persuade those people before the battle, he had to do some homework in advance. This battle would also determine his position in Hulahin's heart. He did not dare to be careless in the slightest. Of course, if he knew that Hulahin had already abandoned him and fled, and that his mansion in All City had long been robbed by the people he trusted, Belinsky, and the people he regarded as his life had also been killed, he probably would not have such thoughts now. At the same time, in the headquarters of the Far Eastern Army in the mountains, Dai Qua also contacted Beta Persei's reinforcements who had arrived at the periphery. When he knew that Beta Persei was already outside the mountains with 4,000 cavalry and could appear at any time, Dai Qua's heart was greatly relieved. He also began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. He wanted to see how many disloyal people there were in the army. He could take advantage of this opportunity to take them all down. The night would eventually pass. On the morning of the second day, Both armies began to gather outside their respective tents, as if they had discussed it beforehand. Both sides had their own thoughts, but with the same goal. They did not fight to the death right from the start. Instead, they arranged themselves in a formation, looking like they wanted to use their power to suppress the other party. The Mongolian army had over 10,000 cavalry. Adding the 3 divisions of the Far Eastern Army and 20,000 cavalry, they had over 30,000 cavalry. Fortunately, the open space under the mountain forest was not small. But even so, from afar, all kinds of flags fluttered high up in the sky and stood in all directions, giving off a boundless and endless feeling. It took nearly 4 hours, starting from dawn until the sun was high in the sky. Finally, the armies of both sides were in formation. Then, it was time for the commanders of each side to take the stage. As for the 5-star army, Chun Bo was still recovering, so he did not appear. The one who replaced him was Dai Qua. This was enough to show his authority from the fact that Chun Bo's guard captain, Xia Qian, appeared beside him. Other than Dai Qua, the 2nd Division's commander, Kong He, the 3rd Division's commander, Shi Xiaolin, and the 5th Division's commander, Wu Ba, all appeared with their respective cavalry. But what was interesting was that these 3 divisions were not gathered together. They maintained a certain distance between each division, giving off a sense of vigilance. In comparison, the Mongol army only had Tang Sheng, Lu, and a few other generals at the front, and their numbers were much lesser. But the advantage was that they seemed to be united. More importantly, Tang Sheng was going to recruit them. This was the most important thing. This was because if this matter was done well, the military strength and morale of both sides would decrease while the other side would increase. It was even possible for there to be a reversal. After both sides were in formation, Tang Sheng rode out under General Ulu's signal. In the sudden silence of both camps, this action was too eye-catching no matter how one looked at it. As Tang Sheng leaped out of the formation, all kinds of discussions began to spread uncontrollably below. There were very few generals in the Far Eastern Army who did not recognize this 4th Division's commander. Especially this time, the Far Eastern Army had lost Al City, and it was all because of this person. This time, it was difficult to not recognize him. He was just a traitor. No one knew what he wanted to do. Could it be that he wanted to repent after seeing the strength of the Far Eastern Army? A few Far Eastern Army soldiers who did not know the truth thought like this. Only some officers who had other thoughts revealed an indescribable expression in their eyes. It was unknown whether they were happy, hesitant, or hesitant. Before Tang Sheng spoke, they probably hadn't made a final decision. Commander Dai, the traitor Tang Sheng has come out. Please allow this general to kill him. The head of the guards, Xia Qian, glared at Tang Sheng and clenched his fists when he saw him gallop out. His eyes were filled with hatred as he spoke. No rush, no rush. Let's wait and see. On the other hand, Dai Qua was not anxious at all. On the contrary, he was looking forward to the other party's performance. He wanted to see how many loyal generals and villains there were in the Far Eastern Army now. Dai Qua had no intention of stopping him. Even if the other officers wanted to charge and kill the enemy, they had no choice but to suppress their anger. They wanted to see what this Tang Sheng had to say. In the eyes of these brave people, if you did something wrong, you should be punished. Even if Tang Sheng said something, they would not easily forgive him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Tang Sheng first swept his gaze over the Far Eastern Army. After recognizing many of his colleagues, he finally opened his mouth slowly. Everyone, I don't think I need to introduce myself. Everyone knows me. Yes, I'm a traitor in the eyes of some of you. Just like that, Tang Sheng's actions caused another round of discussion to erupt from the two great formations. Everyone was discussing. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually admitted that he was a traitor. Without waiting for the discussion to continue fermenting, Tang Sheng shouted again. But I want to say now, I am not a traitor. I am loyal to my tribe. Half of my blood is Mongol. The reason why I led the Mongol army into Archeon was to protect my tribe and continue to reproduce. What's wrong with that? Tang Sheng was almost shouting when he asked, "What's wrong?" After saying this, his face became a little ferocious. Is it wrong to think for my tribe? If that's the case, what's the point of being born? If I can't even protect my own family, how can I be a man? How can I be a man? Hiss. Hearing this, many of the soldiers sucked in a breath of cold air. These words could be said to be heart-wrenching. In ancient times, many soldiers rushed to the battlefield and shouted the slogan to be loyal to the king, to the country. But was this really the case? How many of the so-called loyal people had seen the emperor? How many people had feelings for the so-called country? In the end, soldiers fighting was just a way to make a living. Simply speaking, it was to survive. If there were other purposes, it would be to get promoted and get rich. Therefore, the slogan to be loyal to the king was just a slogan. No one would really think that way. On the contrary, more people did it for the sake of being able to survive in troubled times. There were also some people who were lucky and were promoted from soldiers to officers with some authority. Then, their goal would be higher. This was how they filled their own pockets and how they could take advantage of the situation to create more wealth for themselves. In this way, there was the so-called eating empty pay and stealing military supplies. The direct result of this was that the upper echelons of the military wanted to win the war. This was more beneficial to their future promotion and wealth, and even their wives and children. The middle-level officers, especially those young generals who didn't have much room for promotion, thought the opposite. They wanted to win the war. In this way, the matter of them moving public funds would be impossible to investigate along with the defeat and the death of some people. They could even take advantage of this opportunity to eat more empty pay and get some empty pay. As for the soldiers at the bottom, they were only following orders. If the situation was to their advantage, they would rush up and fight to see if there was a chance to obtain any benefits. On the other hand, once the situation was unfavorable, they would just turn around and run. Staying alive was the most important thing. As for whether or not they won the war, what did it have to do with them? Or rather, there wouldn't be any change in the future. If that was the case, why should they risk their lives? These were some of the true portrayals of the military. Then, could such an army win the war? Without faith, without spiritual support, and without even daring to have hope, could an army expand and unleash their potential? The answer was obviously yes. It was also because of this that Tang Sheng didn't feel any shame for his rebellion. On the contrary, he could still speak frankly in front of everyone without a change in expression. This wasn't because he was thick-skinned, but because his thoughts and perspective were different. After Tang Sheng shouted out what was wrong, his gaze swept across the far eastern army. Then he began to call out names. Commander Chi Wu, as far as I know, your tribe is also outside of all city. Once winter comes, they have to face the pressure of the wind and snow. May I ask, what can you do for them? If you can't, what's the point of being a commander? Vice Commander Zhang Hai, your situation is the same. Let me ask you, how do you feel at ease? Battalion Commander Li Dei, I heard that 3 of your tribesmen have already frozen to death in the heavy snow this winter. Don't tell me you want to continue with the 4th and 5th? Tang Sheng was calling out names. It wasn't targeted at a specific division. It was completely random. He would call out the name of whoever he saw. There were people in a few divisions who were called out. Chapter 1389. All the officers who were called out lowered their heads, proving that Tang Sheng was right, proving that they were having a complicated struggle in their hearts. These people were the unstable elements in the Far Eastern Army. They were the internal problems that Commander Chun Bo was worried about. After Archung was taken down, he did not immediately launch a counterattack. Instead, he split up the army and hid them. He was afraid that the problem would be too big. Now, after hearing Tang Sheng's words, many people had been bewitched to the point that they were ready to make a move. This was especially so for some of the officers who were called out. When they noticed the changes in the gazes of the people around them, they knew that there was no point in hiding anymore. Thus, they decided to stand out and walk towards the Mongolian camp where Tang Sheng was. Some of them did not only bring a single officer, they also brought their brothers and soldiers with them as they walked towards the Mongol cavalry camp. Stop them! Xiaoqian saw that the situation was about to turn bad and quickly shouted. At this moment, Kong He and the other 3 division commanders also looked over. They looked at Dai Qua, who was still riding on his horse calmly. Under everyone's gaze, Dai Qua slowly raised his right hand and said calmly, "Don't stop them. Their hearts are no longer with the 5-star army. They can still be of use to us. We have to respect their choice. If there are others who have the same thoughts, you can also walk over." Not only did he not stop them, he even supported them. This made everyone confused. Tang Xing also saw Dai Qua's actions and laughed. He then said, "I didn't expect General Dai Qua to be such a reasonable person. However, I don't know if you have the same thoughts. You can come over as well. Don't worry, with this general here, I will ensure your wealth and glory." Tang Sheng was actually persuading Dai Qua to surrender. When Xiaoqian heard this, he couldn't help but reach for the scimitar at his waist. He was even prepared to kill Dai Qua if Dai Qua really dared to do that. He would never allow anything to happen to the Far East Army that the commander had single-handedly created. Dai Qua also did not expect such a move. He noticed that there were roughly 3,000 people from the Far Eastern Army who had walked out and joined the Mongol army. Although there were still some people who looked hesitant, they didn't do anything out of line. These people could still be won over, so he thought it was time to stop. While Tang Sheng was comforting him, he said, "Glory and wealth." "Haha, Tang Sheng, are you joking with me?" Since Dai Qua had responded, Tang Sheng was naturally delighted. He was afraid that the other party wouldn't say or do anything. If that happened, he wouldn't know where to start. But once the other party opened his mouth, his opportunity appeared. If there was a problem, there was nothing to be afraid of. All they had to do was solve it. Tang Sheng smiled and wanted to ask why there was no glory and wealth. But before he could speak, Dai Qua continued, "The Mongolians are so poor that they don't even have a uniform. The soldiers don't even have spare cavalry swords. They don't even bear to put salt in their food. Tell me, where did the glory and wealth come from?" The Mongolians were really poor. When they didn't know how to produce and couldn't rob others, their lives were actually very poor. The Mongolians that everyone saw killing cows and sheep were the modern Mongolians, not the old Mongolians. In the past, the Mongolians weren't good at producing. They only knew how to herd animals. If they wanted to eat a good meal, they had to wait until something happened to their animals or they died. Those were the animals that they relied on to survive. The males had to be kept, and the females had to be prepared to give birth. How could they just casually eat them? It was because they were poor that they had to go around robbing. Dai Qua's question made Tang Sheng's expression change. He didn't know how to answer, and this was just the beginning. Through the radio, Dai Qua knew and prepared much more than Tang Sheng. He looked at Tang Sheng with a contemptuous gaze and said, "The glory and wealth you told everyone about should be just a saying. You're trying to deceive everyone, right? But how wise am I? How could I be so easily fooled like these idiots?" As he spoke, Dai Qua pointed at the men who had just joined the Mongolian army from the Far Eastern Army. Being reprimanded, the traitors who had a guilty conscience naturally lowered their heads. There were also some people who looked at Tang Sheng. Evidently, they wanted to hear his explanation. They wanted to know if the glory and wealth he had mentioned was real or fake. Seeing these people staring at him, Tang Sheng felt his hair stand on end. He quickly waved his hands and explained, "Everyone, don't listen to his nonsense. He's just messing with our morale." "Messing with your morale? Ha ha ha. You think too highly of yourself. Do you think you're worthy of talking about morale? You're just a bunch of mobs. You'll go wherever there are benefits. You don't have any principles at all. You don't know what loyalty is. You don't deserve to be human." Dai Qua's voice was very loud as he shouted at Tang Sheng and the soldiers who had just surrendered. This shout made Tang Sheng and the others feel a sense of panic. In order to stabilize the morale of the army, he had to shout as loudly as well. "He's talking nonsense. The Mongolian army has now taken over Al City. Everyone has seen the wealth and prosperity there with their own eyes." Yes, yes. Because of Tang Sheng's words, the traitors who had been slightly shaken started to nod their heads again. They then glared at Dai Qua fiercely, as if saying, You're talking nonsense. You're messing up our morale. Owl City, prosperous. Ha ha. As if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, Dai Kuo looked up to the sky and laughed. Although he was also a division commander in the Far Eastern Army, he had been traveling with Yang Qindong for a while and had conquered many territories. He had seen a lot, and the prosperity of Owl City was not worth mentioning in his eyes. Although he had not been to Qiqian City, just the prosperity of the beginning city was many times better than Owl City. After laughing for a while, Dai Kuo seemed to have finished expressing the laughter in his heart. Then he looked at Tang Sheng and the others with disdain and said, "In your eyes, Owl City might be very busy, but right now, it is not in my eyes." Taking a step back, what does the prosperity of Owl City have to do with you? Do you really think that the Mongolians will treat you as their own and give you benefits? Tang Sheng's face was a little ugly. Of course, he knew that the Mongolians were always on guard against him. In the past 3 months, he had felt it deeply in Owl City. However, at this moment, when the armies were about to clash, he definitely could not admit it. Not only that, he had to praise the Mongolian army. Only then would he be able to raise their morale and obtain victory. After hesitating for a few breaths, Tang Sheng opened his mouth and said, "Why can't you get it to us? I might as well tell you that Hulahan has already agreed. In the future, Owl City will belong to us. Other than our families, our people can also move in." What? Did the Mongolian Great Khan really say that? If that's the case, it's a great thing. In an instant, the Far Eastern Army soldiers started to mutter and discuss. Previously, because the city was too small and could not accommodate so many people, Chunbo made the rule that other than soldiers, ordinary people could not enter the city. It was also because of this that it attracted all sorts of complaints and caused Tang Sheng to rebel. Tang Sheng also grasped this point, which was why his actions had gained the support of more soldiers. It was only because of his call that more than 3,000 soldiers joined his side. This was Tang Sheng's trump card. The reason why he was so confident that he could face the Far Eastern Army with just 10,000 cavalry was also because of this reason. Right now, everyone was discussing animatedly, and the public opinion was obviously leaning toward his side. In order to stabilize the situation and also to speed up Dai Kuo's defeat, he intentionally looked at the Mongolian general Ulu and said, "If everyone doesn't believe me, you can go and ask General Ulu." Ulu had never heard that the Mongolian army wanted to take control of Owl City with Tang Sheng. However, he was not stupid enough to deny all of this. He thought that as long as he won the battle, he could do whatever he wanted. He immediately laughed and said, "That's right, General Tang Sheng is right." The Great Khan did say that he was willing to take control of Owl City with the brothers of the Far Eastern Army and share the world. "You're lying." Just as Wu finished speaking and Tang Sheng's expression relaxed, Dai Kuo shouted loudly. "Stop it!" Dai Kuo shouted. He did not expect Tang Sheng to be so shameless. Furthermore, this Mongolian general was actually lying through his teeth. He had already received the telegram. The Mongolian army had already left Archung after looting the place. How could he say such a thing? Knowing that the other party was lying, Dai Kuo could not let him continue. After he interrupted the other party's words, he said loudly, "Everyone, don't listen to their nonsense. Truth be told, the Mongol army has already left Allaire City after a round of inhumane pillaging." Nonsense. Dai Kuo's words immediately caused Ulu and Tang Sheng to refute in unison. One of them was one of Hulahan's favorite generals, while the other was entrusted with an important task to deal with the Far Eastern Army. With such a status, how could he believe that Hu Lihan had already betrayed him? The two naturally did not believe it, but Dai Kuo, who had received the news, laughed and said, "I knew you wouldn't believe it, but don't worry. There will be evidence in front of you soon. Come on, release the signal." Chapter 1390. The so-called signal was a dazzling firework. Although the effect was a little worse during the day, the loud noise and the scene of the explosion in the sky could still be clearly seen. After the firework was released, rumbling sounds could be heard from the ground. At the same time, a Mongol cavalry scout quickly came to General Ulu's side. "General, we've discovered the enemy." About 4,000 enemy cavalry suddenly appeared behind us. They're flying the 5-star Army's flag. An excellent scout would be able to quickly determine the number of enemies. Just from his point alone, this scout was qualified. However, he only came to report after the rumbling sounds of the war horses. It was too late, so he did not pass. "Bastard! Why did you only report back now?" Wu Lu cursed angrily and lashed out with his horsewhip at the scout. The scout had a wronged expression on his face. He wanted to say that the enemy cavalry was completely covered in green leaves and could not be seen unless they were right in front of them. But at this moment, he no longer had the chance to speak because behind them, the bright 5-starred flag that could not be ignored was already in sight. They had already arrived at the battlefield. When the scout came to report, the Mongol cavalry had already put up a basic resistance. However, when faced with the elite 1st Cavalry Army, how could these Mongol cavalry be a match for them? In just one charge, hundreds of corpses were thrown to the side. Just as they heard the sound of hooves, the 5-star army had already arrived in front of them. When they got closer, they could see that some of the war horses still had green leaves on them. Camouflage and infiltration was one of the training courses of the 5-star army. Furthermore, they already knew the location of the battle, so it was not difficult to enter the battlefield without being discovered. "Everyone listen to my orders, stop." Beta Persei's loud voice sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry immediately stopped. Their formation was neat and orderly, and it was obvious that they were well-trained elites. They did not make a sound, and other than the snorting of the horses, there was no other sound. They all waited for Beta Persei's next order. There was a kind of aura that made people admire him and fear him, not daring to look at him directly. For example, right now, there was a person who had such an aura. His chest was straighter than ever, and his footsteps were steady and sonorous. His gaze was clear and transparent, as if he could look straight into the depths of one's heart. In fact, whether it was a war or a fight between two people, the key to victory was one's mentality. When facing an enemy, he would have the absolute aura of a cat against a mouse. When he was the number one in the world, he would definitely crush his opponent. Then he would win. Although there were only 4,000 cavalry under Yang Er's command, they gave off a feeling that they were an invincible army with thousands of men and horses. They were both cavalry, but in comparison, the Mongol cavalry was much weaker. This could be seen from a shock on the Mongol soldiers' faces. Without comparison, there would be no harm. The 5-star army's military formation was neat, and they were all dressed in the same uniform. Their sabers were of the same length and size, and under the sunlight, they emitted waves of cold light. Even when he was riding on a horse, he was still riding horizontally and vertically, giving people a very shocking visual impression. The formation wasn't trained for nothing, and the effect was very obvious. Not only did it make the soldiers more self-disciplined, but it also made them better at following orders. Just their mental appearance alone gave people a lot of pressure. When more Mongol cavalrymen looked at the 5-star army and didn't know how to describe their feelings, Ulu opened his mouth. "Everyone, don't be afraid. They only have 4,000 people. As long as we charge forward, victory will belong to us. Let's see who dares." Beta Persei faced Ulu's shout, and after a loud shout, the 4,000 5-star army raised their sabers high, and a soul-shaking aura surged out. There were less than 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen left, and they were completely shocked by the aura of the 5-star army. At this moment, they found that they didn't have the courage to take a step forward. As the commander of the army, Ulu naturally saw everything. Because of this, he cleverly didn't take a step forward. Instead, he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, let's go together. As long as we can destroy these Han reinforcements, the main force of the Mongol cavalrymen will arrive soon. At that time, no one will be our opponent." Ulu wanted Tang Sheng and the others to charge first, and then he could sit back and reap the benefits. In his eyes, even 10 Far Eastern Army soldiers weren't as important as a Mongol soldier. Tang Sheng wasn't stupid. How could he not see Ulu's intention? However, he didn't dare to act rashly. Putting aside the fact that he had already witnessed the might of the five-star army when he sent reinforcements to the first city, there were still more than 20,000 soldiers of the Far East army staring at him. Under the shout, Tang Sheng didn't move. Beta Persei saw everything inside. With his personality, since he had brought the army here, of course, he would kill to his heart's content. What Mongol army? What Far East army? He had never placed them in his eyes. They were just a bunch of mobs. As long as he wanted, the 4,000 warriors of the world's first cavalry army could kill all of them. However, he couldn't do this. Before he came, the young master had instructed that the construction of the Far East region needed people the most. A large number of young people. The people in front of him were all strong laborers. They were indispensable talents to build the city and consolidate the territory. If he killed them, who would build the city and who would repair the roads? In order to complete the task given by Yang Chendong, it was impossible to kill a lot of people. However, he could still kill a chicken to show respect. He had to do it. Some people were like this. If you didn't kill them, they wouldn't know fear. However, before he took action, Beta Persei still needed to do something. This was very important to destroy the enemy's morale, establish the final victory, and even unify their hearts. Come, bring them here. Beta Persei didn't give the order to attack immediately. Instead, he shouted to bring people. Soon, the five-star army soldiers escorted 2 men to the battlefield. They arrived in front of the open space between the 2 camps. Of the 2 people, one was a skinny man wearing a Mongol army uniform, and the other was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. Both of their faces were pale, and they were trembling with fear. As soon as the 2 of them were brought out, there were 2 loud shouts from the battlefield. Tuoba Shi, Li Hui. The one called Tuoba Shi was the Mongol soldier. He had another identity, which was General Ulu's personal guard. Previously, he didn't follow the army out of the city because he wasn't feeling well. Instead, he stayed in All City. The one called Li Hui was Tang Sheng's clansman. When the Tang residence's treasures were stolen and his clansmen were killed, Li Hui wasn't in the residence, so he escaped death. These 2 people, because of their special identities, were targeted by Yang Xie's intelligence personnel in All City. They were captured alive and sent out of the city. Last night, Yang Er had already sent someone to pick up the 2 of them. What he wanted was to use their mouths to tell the truth. He wanted Ulu and Tang Sheng to see what kind of person the great Khan Hulahan whom they serve was. Ulu and Tang Sheng were naturally the ones who shouted. It was just their instinct to shout out loud. In contrast, after the 2 people who were called saw their respective masters, their tears uncontrollably flowed out. When a person brushed past death and saw their loved ones, they would definitely reveal their true feelings. General, young clan leader, it's all gone, it's all gone. Tuoba Shi and Li Hui didn't wait for anyone to ask. With tears and snot, they recounted everything that had happened in Al City and what had happened to their family. After that, whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, when they heard that Hulahan had led his troops out of All City and fled to the Siberian region, it was as if they were struck by lightning. They stood in place, not moving at all. Although they did not know why the Great Khan had retreated, one thing was for sure. They were all abandoned people, abandoned as pawns thrown here. Ulu couldn't understand why his Great Khan would abandon him. Tang Sheng's face was full of shame. He thought of how Belinsky persuaded him to send out troops. Belinsky wanted to abandon him, but at the same time, he also wanted to steal his treasures. When he thought of how he had mistakenly trusted Belinsky, and how he and Li Hui were the only 2 people left in the entire tribe, he couldn't help but scream, "Belinsky, you liar! You despicable, you bastard!" It was because Tang Sheng believed in Belinsky that he became a traitor to the Far Eastern Army and came to this point. But what he got was betrayal and the destruction of his tribe. If he could do it all over again, Tang Sheng would not have made such a choice. Whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, they both had fierce looks in their eyes as they cursed everything that had happened to them. This scene was seen by the other officers and soldiers, and all of them fell into deep thought. This was especially so for the Far Eastern Army that had defected with Tang Sheng. They thought that after joining their new master, they would be able to enjoy glory and wealth. At the very least, they would be able to ensure the safety of their tribesmen. But now, not only would they not be able to save their tribesmen, they would also not have a good ending. After all, traitors never had a good ending. The atmosphere of the battlefield changed drastically because of the appearance of Tuoba Shi and Li Hui. The most obvious change was that the Far East army that had surrendered had become restless and restless. Charge! Was such a good opportunity. How could Beta Persei let it go? With an order, the 4,000 five-star army cavalry behind him moved, raising their sabers and urging their horses forward. The first to bear the brunt of this attack were the 2,000 Mongol cavalry. Their morale was already low, and Tuoba Shi's appearance had destroyed their hope. Just as their morale was at its lowest, the five-star army charged over. How could they stop them? Chapter 1391. When the arrow formation stabbed into the Mongol cavalry camp, the resistance they faced could be said to be minuscule. This allowed the attack of the 5-star Legion Corps to go really smoothly. With just one charge, they charged into the enemy formation, and no one could stop them. Block them, block them! Ulu, who finally came back to his senses, shouted at the army as he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, although we have been abandoned, we have to kill our way out for ourselves. Otherwise, what awaits us will be worse than death." How could Tang Sheng not know? He was a traitor, and from a certain point of view, he was far more hateful than the enemy. Once he was caught by the 5-star army, he would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Tang Sheng did not want to die and could not die. He still wanted to take revenge on Belinsky. He immediately waved his sword and shouted to his troops, "Everyone, follow me and kill our way out. Let's find Houlihan and take revenge." With a loud shout, Tang Sheng was the first to gallop out of the camp. The group of personal guards beside him also followed suit. However, that was it. Including the soldiers, there were only 20 or so cavalry. As for the others, including Qi Wu, Zhang Shi, and Li Dei, they all stood in place and did not move at all. The soldiers behind them also followed beside their general. They also had no intention of charging out of the battle. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrived and Houlihan fled without saying anything, it was clear that the situation was over. Anyone with a brain would not make the decision to become enemies with the 5-star army. Other than the 20 or so soldiers, there was actually no one following them. Tang Sheng's face revealed a trace of loneliness. However, he did not blame these people. They had already followed him down the wrong path. He could not drag them to their deaths. "Come, follow me and kill our way out. Kill!" Tang Sheng was determined to fight to the death. He was the first to charge towards the 5-star army. He knew very well what he had done. Even if he surrendered now, he would not benefit at all. Since that was the case, he might as well take the risk. If he could really break out, he would definitely find a way to find Belinsky and take revenge for the extermination of his clan. Surround them all. Don't let a single one escape. Beta Persei was riding on a big, strong horse, his face full of excitement. After following Yang Qindong for so many years, there were fewer and fewer opportunities for him to take action, let alone the opportunity to lead an army alone. It wasn't easy for him to let go of everything and go on a killing spree. He would cherish it very much. "Come, don't waste any more time. Both of you, come at me together." Beta Persei laughed heartily as he casually pointed his broadsword at Ulu and Tang Sheng. It was as if he was looking down on the world. Attack together. After Ulu and Tang Sheng exchanged a look, they nodded in unison. Then, they whipped their horses and charged towards Beta Persei. This was their only chance. With 2 against 1, their chances of winning were still very high. As long as they could capture this general, they would be able to force their way out of the encirclement. Wu Luning had become a general among the many Mongolian cavalry. His own ability was naturally unquestionable. There was no culture at all, and one could not rely on qualifications and other resources. Those who could become generals were undoubtedly extremely capable. Tang Sheng was the same. To be able to stand out among so many people and be appointed as a teacher, his own combat strength must be very strong. Both of them were like this. Together, they could be considered a strong combination. If they only fought one person, their chances of winning were quite high. At least in the Far Eastern Army, Chun Bo, including the army commander, would not be a match for him. But who was Beta Persei? He was one of the 5 members of the Yang Qindong family. He had been by Yang Qindong's side all year round. Apart from being different from the rest, his own combat strength was also constantly improving. If his strength was too weak, he would not have the face to stay by Yang Qindong's side. Not to mention other things, if there was really danger, who would protect who? It was not an exaggeration to say that in the entire Yangtze, the entire 5-star army, Beta Persei was not ranked number 1 in terms of leading troops to war. He also did not have much experience, but if it was a one-on-one battle, then there were really not many people who could be his opponent. With Yang Qindong's personal guidance and the Black Knights of Dragon Guards feeding him moves every day, he was not afraid at all, even if it was just 1 versus 2. He pulled out the divine sword from his waist. When he was fighting 2 people by himself, Beta Persei not only did not take a defensive position, but also took the initiative to launch an attack. He would not forget what Yang Qindong had said. That offense was the best defense. Relying on the strength of the divine sword in his hand, Beta Persei was full of confidence as he pulled his horse forward. The 3 generals immediately fought together. Under the gaze of many Far Eastern Army soldiers, the wind from their swords collided and the blades struck each other. The 3 of them were almost all fighting openly, without the slightest bit of hypocrisy. It was completely a competition of strength and technique. This kind of battle also took into account one's own physique. If one's strength was not enough, one might show signs of defeat after just 1 blow. If one showed a flaw, it would often cost one's life. In a battle of life and death, a little negligence and a trace of insufficient strength could lead to the loss of one's life. As generals, the 3 of them naturally understood this principle. Therefore, when they attacked, they used all their strength. It was a fight to the death. Ding ding dang. The divine sword in Beta Persei's hand collided twice in a very short period of time, colliding with the divine sword in the hands of Ulu and Tang Sheng respectively. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. In this first exchange, the 3 of them had a preliminary impression of each other at the same time, especially Ulu and Tang Sheng, who felt the numbness in their arms after the first blow. Their faces had become a little nervous. They could feel that if they were to rely on strength alone, they would not be Beta Persei's opponent. Beta Persei belonged to the group of people with extraordinary strength. In addition, he was by Yang Qindong's side every day, eating and drinking well, and his strength was constantly increasing. In terms of strength alone, even the talented Black Cavalry was no match for him. Only the abnormal Yang Qindong could suppress him. It was his confidence that made Beta Persei so confident when he was fighting against 2 people by himself. And after using his sword to fight against 2 people in a row, this confidence swelled even more. Haha, great. Beta Persei also felt a slight tremor in his arm. He laughed and turned around to attack. He had no intention of resting. It was a competition of strength, and he would not stop until he was dead. This person is so strong. Take my spear. After Tang Sheng felt the tremendous pressure from the sword, he knew that if this continued, perhaps before he could do anything to his opponent, his arm would become red and swollen, and he would not be able to exert any strength. He simply put away his sword and changed to a spear. He swapped the red Sakura spear hanging next to his horse. The reason why the cavalry mainly used the divine sword was because it was light and flexible. For example, the cavalry required fast speed, fast attack, and fast deployment. All of these had strict requirements for weapons. It was not that they could not use a spear. In history, there were cavalry who used heavy and powerful hammers as weapons. It was just that using such a weapon would inevitably affect their speed and flexibility in combat. As a result, most people used the divine sword. However, those who could use a spear were all people who believed themselves to be strong enough to use it. Otherwise, wouldn't they be giving up on flexibility and speed? Wouldn't they be courting death? Tang Sheng changed to a spear, which was enough to prove his confidence in himself and his satisfaction with his physical fitness. He wanted to use his strength to suppress Beta Persei and then find a favorable opportunity for Ulu to attack. With the spear in his hand, Tang Sheng felt as if he was the king of the world. With a loud shout, Tang Sheng's chi sank into his dantian. Borrowing the power of the spear, he swung the spear at Yang air. The spear swept through the air, causing a weak explosion. Good. Beta Persei, who was rushing over, also laughed. He did not have the slightest idea of retreating because his opponent had changed his weapon. On the contrary, his fighting spirit was even more abundant. He was afraid that his opponent would not use his full strength. Just like when he was sparring with the Black Cavalry, everyone was afraid of accidentally injuring each other, so naturally, they would have a backup plan. It was not like this kind of life and death battle, where it was either you die or I die. There was no need to worry so much. Only then could a fight be called carefree. With a smile still on his face, Beta Persei had already urged his horse to come in front of Tang Sheng. His sword and spear collided several times in a very short period of time. There was a continuous sound of clashing, and because they were all so fast, it made the onlookers feel dazzled. With the length of the spear, Tang Sheng was able to restrain Beta Persei's attack for a while, keeping him at a distance of 10 feet. He was temporarily out of danger. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ulu attacked. He took advantage of the spear entangling the divine sword to launch a sneak attack and harass Beta Persei from the side. He did not expect to be able to hurt Beta Persei. As long as he could distract him, it was equivalent to creating an opportunity for Tang Sheng. Although it was the first time the two of them worked together, there were few flaws between them. Perhaps they also knew that this was a life and death battle, and it would be very dangerous if they did not use their full strength. So when they attacked, they used all their strength and displayed their strongest attacks and methods. Entangled by the spear and harassed by the dagger, Beta Persei fell into a passive situation. Several times, he revealed some small flaws. Perhaps it was because he was strong enough that the dagger shook off his opponent's weapon several times, but he was afraid that he would have been injured by now. If it were someone else in this position, they would probably have to call for help. After all, the 5-star army had the advantage in terms of strength. And because of the bravery and strength of the warriors, nearly 2,000 Mongolian cavalry had been disrupted and were in the middle of being surrounded. It seemed that victory was already in sight. As such, there were hundreds of 5-star army cavalry around the 3-man group battle. They were here to prevent Ulu and Tang Sheng from escaping, and they were also prepared to support Beta Persei at any time. Chapter 1392. As long as Beta Persei shouted and retreated, the 5-star army cavalry watching from the sidelines would swarm forward. At that time, it would not be 2 against 1, but dozens of people against 1. But Beta Persei did not complain, nor did he have the slightest intention of backing down. His identity did not allow him to back down, and the celestial sword in his hand was where his confidence lay. He had already clashed with his opponent's weapon for more than a dozen rounds. The weapons in the hands of these two generals were not ordinary iron, at least much tougher than ordinary iron. But there was a limit to how strong they were. In the face of the celestial sword made with the highest forging technology in the world, it was only a matter of time before they broke. And once the opponent's weapon broke from the middle, it would be time for Beta Persei to launch a counterattack. Now he only needed to maintain enough physical strength and rely on his arm strength to not let the opponent hurt him. The 3 weapons were still clashing, and stars would appear from time to time, indicating that the 3 of them seemed to have used all their strength in each attack, and each attack was extremely dangerous. In this way, the three of them continued to attack for another 5 rounds. Beta Persei's eyes shone brightly when he saw that there was a large gap on the opponent's weapon. He knew that the celestial sword had finally taken advantage of his advantage. The opponent's weapon would break at any time, and his opportunity to counterattack had appeared. The time had come. Beta Persei suddenly shouted, and the strength in his arm increased by a bit, so much so that it reached 90% of his overall strength. He slashed the celestial sword at the body of the spear. Under the great force, Tang Sheng felt his arm tighten. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Fortunately, he managed to control himself at the last moment. When he looked up, he saw that Beta Persei had given up on him and was slashing his sword at Ulu. Good chance. Tang Sheng's eyes lit up. Then he gripped the spear tightly and thrust it forward. He only needed 2 breaths to stab the spearhead into Beta Persei's armor, severely injuring his opponent and capturing the most important hostage. Beta Persei seemed to treat Tang Sheng as an invisible person. At this time, he was slashing his saber at Ulu's body, looking like he was going to fight to the end. Ulu could tell that Beta Persei was going all out. Logically speaking, he should have urged his horse to retreat and avoid the brunt of Beta Persei's attack. For someone like him who grew up on horseback, he did not need to exert any force on the reins when advancing or retreating with his horse. He only needed to gently press his legs together to communicate with his horse and retreat in the face of battle. However, Ulu did not retreat. He needed to create favorable conditions and enough time for Tang Sheng to attack. This made it necessary for him to block a few slashes from the saber. Wu Lu was confident that he would be able to block 3 or 4 attacks within 2 breaths of time, rather than holding the saber with one hand. There was no problem with his strength. Ulu was confident about this. However, the problem was that his weapon could not do it. When faced with the divine cavalry saber that could cut through iron like mud, Wu Lu's cavalry saber had already been chipped. It was only because he had been fighting hard that he did not notice it. Ulu did not expect that his weapon, which had always been very tough, would be broken in half. Therefore, he still followed his previous fighting style, placing the saber on his body and defending himself. 1 hit, 2 hits. When the 3rd hit came, Beta Persei's saber slashed at the gap in Ulu's saber. Then, with a crisp breaking sound, the saber broke into 2 pieces. The sudden change caught Ulu off guard. Before he could react, the divine saber had already landed on Ulu's body. The sharp edge of the saber directly broke his bones. With just 1 blow, Ulu was cut into 2 halves. Blood splattered out as Yu's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell from his horse. Even as he died, he still could not understand how his weapon could suddenly break in half. Could it be that this Han general knew some kind of magic? Ulu was dead. He was cut in half and died in an extremely miserable manner. Blood also splashed on Beta Persei. But for Beta Persei, who had been on countless battlefields and killed countless enemies, he did not care at all. As if he had done an extremely simple thing, he turned around and prepared to deal with another enemy, Tang Sheng. It was also at this moment that he felt something poke his body. It did not hurt, so he immediately turned around to look. Beta Persei turned around and looked at the spot where he was stabbed. He saw a broken spearhead, Tang Sheng who was holding the spear, and the other party's frightened eyes. Just now, Beta Persei had used up 2 breaths of time to kill Ulu, which created enough opportunity for Tang Sheng. Next, he unceremoniously raised his spear and stabbed, with a victorious smile on his face. It was not until the spear stabbed out that his expression suddenly changed. He did not feel the tip of the spear entering his body, but only the feeling of the blade piercing into a hard boulder, unable to move forward. At the same time, Tang Sheng's gaze quickly turned to the tip of the spear. At some point, the tip of the spear had been broken, leaving only a wooden handle. At this time, the wooden handle was stabbed towards Beta Persei, and it hit the other party's exquisite armor. Beta Persei, who had been by Yang Qindong's side all year round, could be said to be a treasure from head to toe. Just like the armor he was wearing, it was thin and extremely hard. Yang Xie's munitions factory spent a lot of effort to make it. Such armor was also very rare in the entire 5-star army. With Beta Persei's status, it was naturally not a problem for him to get one. The spear was stabbed into the armor, unable to move forward. Tang Sheng was still in the same position, his face full of surprise and confusion. Seeing that Tang Sheng's spear had stabbed into his armor, Beta Persei's face was full of anger. Originally, Tang Sheng had betrayed the 5-star army, Yang Xie, and the young master, causing him to want to kill him. Now that Tang Sheng even wanted to kill him, this person could not be left alive. Beta Persei, who had already killed Ulu, gently turned around and easily moved the spear to the side. Then, the celestial saber slashed through the air and slashed towards Tang Sheng's neck. War has always been cruel. Either you die or I die. Beta Persei was furious. The saber was as fast as lightning. When Tang Sheng came back to his senses, he had only just raised the spear when the wooden spear was cut in half. The saber did not continue to fall and fell on Tang Sheng's neck, then quickly slashed. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and Tang Sheng's eyes gradually became blurred. At this time, he seemed to have seen the scene of him growing up with the help of the tribe when he was young. He also seemed to have seen the scene of him joining the Far Eastern Army and eating his first full meal. Then, he rose step by step and finally became a division commander. Then, his ambition began to grow, and his heart became unsatisfied until he did the wrong thing of betraying the Far Eastern Army. Tang Sheng was dead. Even when he died, his eyes were wide open, and he looked like he could not die in peace. No one knew what he was thinking before he died, and no one knew if he would regret his wrong actions and thoughts. With Tang Sheng's death, the soldiers he brought with him immediately became obedient, especially the more than 3,000 soldiers who had just chosen to surrender to him. Their faces were full of regret. If they had known that this would be the result, why did they stand out? Weren't they courting death? Nearly 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, half were killed, and the other half were captured. More than 10,000 rebels from the Far Eastern Army were surrounded by Division Commander Dai Qua and 20,000 soldiers, and all of them chose to put down their weapons and surrender. Even Ulu and Tang Sheng were not a match for them. Unless they did not want to live, who would dare to raise their swords against them? The rebellion was thus quelled, but the matter was not over. How to stabilize the people's hearts and win them over was an important task for Yang Qindong after arriving in the Far Eastern province. After 3 months of chaos and arching, Yang Qindong arrived. Along with him were thousands of 5-star army's elite cavalry, thousands of Mongolian captives, and thousands of ordinary Russian tribesmen. When Yang Qindong led the army into Al City, whose city walls weren't very tall, all he saw was a mess on the streets and chaos on the ground. On the streets, he could see the corpses of ordinary people lying on the ground. There were old people, women, and children. Many of them had been conquered by the 5-star army. They were the people who had come to support the Far Eastern province, but they did not expect to die in such a chaotic situation. Along the way, Yang Qindong's expression became uglier and uglier. These were his people, and they had actually died in the city. He had to take revenge for Hulin. Fortunately, after inspecting the corpses, he discovered that there were very few Han people. Later on, Yang Qindong understood the situation in the city. When the Mongolian soldiers killed and looted, the few Han people in the city chose to hide. They threw away all their money in order to save their lives. These Han people persevered. As long as they were still alive, everything would still be there. Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely bring them a better life. In order to survive, after the Mongol soldiers left, some of the criminals in the city started to pillage and kill. These Han Chinese once again chose to band together. They picked up their weapons and became a force to be reckoned with. As long as they did not take the initiative to find trouble with others, no one would find trouble with them. This was how they managed to survive until Yang Qindong's arrival. As Yang Qindong entered the city, the law and order in the city quickly stabilized. On the streets, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army were patrolling the streets. They were dressed in neat military uniforms, riding on tall horses and wielding divine weapons in their hands. Whenever they discovered someone doing something illegal on the streets, they would immediately lash out with their horsewhips and capture them. There was no room for discussion. Chapter 1393. The impartiality of the five-star army soldiers shocked some of the rebels and made them more obedient. However, there were still some daring people who took advantage of the fact that the five-star army's numbers were not high. They gathered their forces and attacked the patrolling soldiers of the five-star army. They attacked with dozens of people and even hundreds of people. These people were mostly white-skinned Russians. They took a liking to the soldiers' uniforms and sharp sabers, as well as the sturdy war horses they were riding. Facing the provocation and the rebels who were shouting and holding weapons such as sabers, sticks, clubs, and even hoes, the five-star army did not hold back and killed them all. Since they dared to provoke the army, these people had already lost their humanity and deserved to die. Dozens of people, or even hundreds of people, could not even hold up against the charge of the world's #1 cavalry army and suffered heavy casualties. The formation was in chaos, and they scattered in all directions. Those who could not escape became members of the prison. In just a single afternoon, the prison of the Far Eastern Army was filled with people. Some of the people who were caught later could only be tied up in the square outside the prison. Fortunately, it was already the 5th month, and the weather was not too cold. They would not freeze to death. In troubled times, severe punishments were needed. When Yang Qindong heard the report that there were rebels in the city, he did not restrict the actions of the five-star army soldiers. On the contrary, he supported them. He knew that one could not be merciful on the battlefield. Otherwise, one would be asking for trouble. There were some people that couldn't be reasoned with. Only continuous slaughter would make them realize their mistakes and realize the power of the five-star army. Thus, they had no choice but to restrain themselves and become honest. While they were clearing out the unstable elements in all city and had no choice but to kill, Tian Hu's 4,000 cavalrymen successfully intercepted Hulahin's troops who were escaping to the west. After a round of fighting, Hulahin brought 12,000 Mongol cavalrymen and escaped. On the other hand, Belinsky, who had too many items and could not bear to throw them away, was captured on the spot. He had personally witnessed the strength of the five-star army. When he saw the strength of the five-star army, the Mongol soldiers panicked and ran away with twisted faces. He saw that iron sabers and wooden spears were thrown all over the ground. The various items that they had snatched had also become burdens. They had all been abandoned in order to increase their speed. The army was defeated like a landslide. Countless Mongol cavalrymen, who were known as the strongest army, fled like sheep seeing wolves. They all exposed their backs to the five-star army and were chased by the world's #1 cavalry army. They did not have any intention of resisting. This kind of strength only the Mongol cavalrymen and some Mongol tribes did not belong to the Mongol army. Unexpectedly, there was always someone stronger. The five-star army was actually so ferocious that the Mongol cavalrymen could not fight back at all. Belinsky was captured, but he was not depressed. On the contrary, he felt that this was an opportunity for him. Since the Mongol cavalrymen could not defeat the five-star army, why would he not join the strong? With such a powerful cavalry as his backing, he would not have to be afraid of anyone when he went out to do business. With this beautiful thought in mind, Belinsky stopped the resistance of the guards of the caravan. They obediently surrendered their weapons. Belinsky also reported his identity. At the same time, he put forward his request. He wanted to see the highest general of the five-star army here. He had some information to report. Tian Hu saw that Belinsky seemed like someone important. He also thought about how his teacher had just arrived and needed to understand the situation here through various channels. He also needed various people to help him complete his mission. As such, he nodded and agreed. He did not even use a rope to tie Belinsky up. He gave him a very relaxed environment and allowed him to come to arching with him. This also strengthened Belinsky's confidence. He believed that with his own abilities, he would be able to achieve great things. As for the fact that he had tricked the Far Eastern Army, that was nothing. Wasn't it like this during times of war? Today we can drink and chat happily, but tomorrow we might fight. On the other hand, today we might be enemies, but tomorrow we might be friends. To sum it up, there is no such thing as an eternal friend, only eternal benefits. Because of the Five-Star Army's ruthless methods, Archung went from chaos to peace. Then, when the Far Eastern Army that had disappeared for 3 months suddenly appeared in the city, the security in the city became as good as before. As a large number of troops entered the city, some criminals who had not given up on making a fortune in the chaos had no choice but to put away their crooked thoughts. At this moment, it could be said that Archung had returned to Yang Xie's embrace. Chen Bo's condition gradually stabilized. After the army entered the city, he went straight to the city lord's mansion where Yang Chendong lived. When he saw Yang Chendong, who had taken off his golden cloak and changed into a loose green robe, Chen Bo knelt on the ground with a plop. "Young master, I've made a mistake. I've failed to live up to your expectations. Get up quickly." Under Yang Chendong's gaze, Beta Persei, who came to report with him, quickly helped Chen Bo up. "You haven't recovered yet. You still have to take care of your body. Have a seat." Yang Chendong asked with concern. Although the arching incident was lost because of Tang Sheng's rebellion, Chen Bo, who was both the commander and the governor, also had an unshirkable leadership responsibility, as well as the responsibility of not knowing what was right and what was wrong. Of course, one of the fuses that caused the incident was the mistake in his strategy of governing the city. Why did Tang Sheng rebel? Wasn't it because his people were not allowed to enter the city? This policy was set by Chen Bo. On the other hand, even if Tang Sheng didn't rebel this time, as time passed, more and more problems would accumulate, and when the contradiction became bigger and bigger, things would still happen. This was equivalent to a pustule in a person's body. If it was left alone, it would get bigger and bigger. It was better to squeeze it out and make it healthier. Chen Bo, who was sitting in the chair, had a guilty look on his face. In the past few years, the Far Eastern Province had received a lot of supplies from Yang Xie. In comparison, although there were some achievements, they were not very big. The rebellion this time was equivalent to erasing all of the previous achievements. He was even prepared to be removed from his position, or even convicted. Even though Chen Bo was sitting on a chair, he still lowered his head as if he was in the wrong. Seeing this, Yang Chendong shook his head and said, "Chen Bo, you can be considered an old man who has been following me for a long time. Back then, when you and Wu Sheng cooperated, you had such great chemistry. No matter what mission was given to you, you could complete it very well. This young master also has high hopes for you." Wu Sheng was sent to the Golden Horde for several years. He has successfully established a cooperative relationship with some important figures in the Russian tribe and built his own Nuxia city. His actions are gratifying. As for you, this young master also has high hopes for you. I gave you the power of the governor and the commander of the Far Eastern Province. You have done well, so you don't have to worry that this young master will punish you. You are innocent. In order to dispel Chen Bo's worries and psychological burdens, Yang Chendong directly settled the matter. After saying that he was innocent, even if someone wanted to impeach or blame Chen Bo, it would be useless. Yang Chendong's words were like nails on a board. In Chen Bo's ears, he was very excited. "Thank you, sixth young master, for your affirmation of my work. But Tang Sheng was promoted by me. If something happens to him, I am guilty. I ask that I resign from the position of commander of the Far Eastern Army. Sixth young master, please accept my resignation." Looking at Chen Bo's stubbornness, Yang Chendong was angry and said, "This young master said that you are innocent. If you are guilty, you are just not open-minded enough. It's just a mistake caused by inexperience. It's nothing. No, the rebellion has happened. Someone has to stand up and take responsibility. This subordinate is willing to resign from the position of commander. Chenbo's second resignation showed his determination. Meritorious service should be rewarded. Mistakes should be punished. The matter of the Far Eastern province was not a small matter. Who knew how many people were watching? If there was no explanation, then the law would be in chaos. Yang Chendong said, "Good. Since it's like this, then you will be relieved of your position as commander of the Far Eastern Army. You should focus on your work as the governor." "Thank you, sixth young master." Chenbo, who got what he wanted, quickly cupped his fists in gratitude. He did not want to break the rules because of himself. With Yang Chendong's guarantee, no one would find trouble with him. However, there was no guarantee that no one would find trouble with the sixth young master. As far as he knew, there were many people in Crimson City who dared to speak up. Now that he was relieved of his position as commander of the Far Eastern Army, it was the same as giving everyone an explanation. He could also focus on his work as the governor. After staying here for a few years, in the beginning he had some complaints about being transferred to this godforsaken place. But over the years, he had watched Owl City grow from nothing, and he had developed feelings for it. If you were to transfer him away now, he would be reluctant to do so. More importantly, Yang Chendong came here. With his ability to turn something rotten into something magical, he would have a bright future in the Far Eastern province. He really wanted to follow the sixth young master and do a good job. After being relieved of his position as commander, Chenbo seemed to be a lot more relaxed in an instant. When he talked about work, his state of mind was a lot more energetic than before. Sixth young master, although Tang Sheng's selfishness caused a mutiny this time, the fact that so many people were willing to follow him to rebel against the Far Eastern Army is enough to show that our work is not up to par. The main thing is that Owl City is still too small. Arranging for 500,000 people from all over the place is already a lot of pressure. We really can't arrange for other soldiers' clansmen, even for senior officers like division commanders. Some openings cannot be opened. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.